If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 41, The Meeting. Send power stones please. Late at night, Minato Namikaze lay quietly on the bed, gazing at Kushina beside him as she slept soundly. A gentle smile appeared on his face. Kushina was the girl he had loved since childhood. To Minato, the fact that they had ended up together felt nothing short of a blessing from heaven. He had always believed himself to be lucky ever since he was young. The childhood friend he studied alongside had become his wife. One of the legendary Sunin, Jiraiya, had taken him as a disciple and taught him countless things, ninjutsu, principles of life, and what it truly meant to be a ninja. Jiraiya was the person Minato respected most in this world. No exceptions. Beyond that, Minato had always carried a dream in his heart, a dream of becoming Hokage. And now, that dream had come true. Not only had he become Hokage of Konoha, he had become the youngest Kage in the history of the village, perhaps even the entire shinobi world. Such fortune almost felt unreal. It was something he cherished deeply. Ha! As these thoughts crossed his mind, Minato let out a soft sigh. Yes, he was lucky, but that luck had begun to crack the moment he became Hokage. Only now did he realize how naive his earlier understanding of the world had been. His past success had not come from luck alone, but from the era he lived in and from the shelter of his teacher. After ascending to the Hokage's seat, he finally glimpsed another side of reality. Even though he had only scratched the surface, it was already enough to shatter many of his assumptions. Some matters could no longer be judged simply as right or wrong. Instead, decisions had to be made based on interests and positions. For example, earlier that very day, after Hikaru left, Minato had drafted a preliminary proposal regarding the Uchiha clan. He had long been aware of the tension between the Uchiha and the village. From the moment he became Hokage, he had been thinking about how to bring them back into Konoha's embrace. This proposal was an experiment. He wanted to see how the third Hokage would react and how the Uchiha themselves would respond. But before the Uchiha could react at all, the proposal had been rejected that very afternoon. To put it bluntly, the document hadn't even made it past routine circulation within the administration department before it was intercepted and sent back. The job of Hokage is far more troublesome than I imagined. Minato sighed inwardly. Still, he couldn't allow himself to show too much emotion. Many things would have to be handled slowly, step by step. Just like that child Deep Sea Hikaru. Minato truly hoped Hikaru could play a role. Based on Kakashi's reports, Minato couldn't help but think more deeply about certain matters. Hikaru's position within ANBU was, frankly, ideal from Minato's perspective. He had solid strength. He was Kakashi's former classmate and now his captain. He had spent 5 years in ANBU and currently led a squad. If someone like that could assist from within ANBU, perhaps even relay internal conditions, that would be far more valuable than relying on Kakashi. Kakashi was his disciple. Because of that relationship, he could never truly integrate into ANBU in the purest sense. What Minato needed was someone who belonged to ANBU, someone who had lived there long enough to be shaped by it. Suddenly, Minato's brows furrowed slightly. His Flying Thunder God mark had been activated. That alone was unusual, but what truly surprised him was how it had been activated. The method was refined, deliberate. Not only did it allow the Flying Thunder God technique to function normally, it also enabled the mark's creator to precisely determine the activator's location. The person who activated this mark understands the Flying Thunder God technique. Minato's thoughts sharpened instantly. He rose from bed, quietly put on his outer robe, and focused on sensing the source of the activation. A moment later, his expression turned strange. Because the mark wasn't in any of the usual locations he had prepared over the years. It was in one of the most remote corners of Konoha. Understands Flying Thunder God, activating it late at night, in the most secluded part of the village. At that moment, Minato had a guess. And only one person fit it. He glanced back at Kushina, still sleeping peacefully, then stepped softly into the living room. As he walked, his chakra gathered silently. The moment he reached the center of the room, it surged. In the next instant, his figure vanished. When he reappeared, he was standing in a forest. At his feet lay a sealing scroll. And in front of him stood a silver-haired youth in full ANBU attire, a mask covering his face. Nightingale. Minato sighed softly. Or perhaps, it's more appropriate to call you Hikaru. Actually, Hikaru replied calmly, his voice gentle and respectful. It's also fine if you call me Senju Hikaru, Hokage-sama. Minato looked at him intently. I didn't expect you to state your surname so directly, he said slowly. It seems you've already inferred quite a lot. Hikaru didn't answer immediately. Through the eyeholes of his mask, his gaze was steady and composed. Indeed, he had figured out many things, some of them long ago. Konoha could not know his identity. This was something he had suspected for a long time. The truth was simply whether the village was willing to tear away that thin layer of pretense. This meeting with Minato was Hikaru's attempt to gain more, and to do that, he needed to be sufficiently open. But what did openness mean? He wasn't foolish enough to speak of transmigration, or the existence of some external cheat. Those were secrets he would bury for life. So instead, he chose the best possible alternative. Something he had hidden, but something Konoha already knew. His origin. The Senju clan. The Senju's decline had forced them into obscurity. By openly acknowledging a surname he had long concealed, Hikaru was already showing more than enough sincerity. Being frank, Hikaru said with a slight bow and a polite smile. Whether toward myself or toward Hokage-sama, is a form of respect. From here on, please guide me well. Minato let out a quiet sigh, then nodded. I understand, Hikaru-kun, he said. In that case, I'll be counting on you as well. Chapter 42, Personal Instruction. Send power stones please. Hikaru had guessed correctly. Revealing his identity did earn him a certain degree of acknowledgement from Minato Namikaze, at least in terms of attitude. But Hikaru also understood clearly that this acknowledgement was shallow. More than that, he knew his move could just as easily trigger Minato's suspicion, and he might even treat it as ulterior motives. And honestly, if Minato thought that way, Hikaru wouldn't find it strange at all. If he were in Minato's position, facing someone who kept sending half-clear messages through Kakashi, refused to explain things fully, hid his true identity, and showed obvious resentment toward the third Hokage's faction, he would be on guard too. Minato wasn't naive. He was kind and carried goodwill toward the village, yes, but he'd fought through enough battlefields and crises to survive. If he were truly foolish, he would have died long ago. So now, Hikaru's priority was simple. Control the tone of this relationship and prevent it from sliding into hostility. Because he still wanted sealing techniques and the Flying Thunder God. If this turned ugly, he'd lose everything. I imagine, Hokage-sama, you must have a lot of doubts right now. His voice remained gentle. Then he slowly removed his mask, revealing his face. Showing his true face to Minato was also a form of sincerity. Yes, Minato nodded seriously. I have many questions. He looked straight at Hikaru. Hikaru-kun. I'm curious. Those things you had Kakashi pass on to me, what were you thinking when you did that? Hikaru gave a quiet sigh, looking almost helpless. To be honest, I didn't think too deeply. And if I had the choice, I wouldn't want to meet the fourth Hokage at all. Minato's expression turned slightly strange. Hikaru continued calmly. Hokage-sama should already sense it. Your orders can't truly be carried out as you intend, can they? Take ANBU, for example. Many of the commands we receive still come from the third Hokage, not the fourth. So unless it was genuinely necessary, I wouldn't dare come to you. He spoke with quiet sincerity, and Minato felt the impact land harder than he expected. Minato already knew much of this, but hearing it from an ANBU captain was different. It wasn't rumor. It was confirmation. ANBU was Akage's most critical tool. Yet Minato's control over it was close to zero. And it wasn't just ANBU. The administration department, with Narashikaku at its core, treated Minato with respect. They analyzed problems, drafted policy documents, and prepared orders. But in the waiting process, they would still notify the third Hokage or even Danzō. In other words, Minato wore the title of Hokage, but not the full authority. Minato drew a slow breath. His voice turned sharper. Then why choose to come to me at all, Hikaru-kun? You know my situation. Are you trying to push me into turning against the third Hokage? Or? No, Hokage-sama, you've misunderstood. Hikaru cut him off instantly. That was a burden he absolutely could not carry, even if he had thoughts in that direction. If you and the third Hokage openly break, setting aside whether you'd even win, Konoha would suffer unpredictable damage. His tone stayed warm, but his logic was firm. The war has only just ended. The village is still weak. If something like that happens now, we're finished. And yes, as a member of the Senju clan, I do want the third Hokage's faction to lose its grip on power. But as a shinobi of Konoha, especially as ANBU, I know what choice must come first. He stopped there, saying no more. But he was watching Minato carefully. Minato's face remained unreadable, yet Hikaru's sensing told him the truth. Minato had relaxed, just slightly. First hurdle cleared. After a long silence, Minato finally spoke. Then why did you still seek me out? I don't believe it was for sealing techniques. And I don't believe it was only for Kakashi. Say it plainly. Otherwise, we can't continue. Hikaru nodded once. You're right. Taking that risk requires a real reason. And the first reason? I believe Hokage-sama has already guessed it. Guessed? Minato frowned, then his eyes sharpened. Flying Thunder God. Yes. Hikaru's gaze dropped to the scroll on the ground. My first purpose is to learn the Flying Thunder God technique. Minato nodded. That much tracked Hikaru being able to activate the mark already proved he understood too much for it to be coincidence. And besides that? Minato asked. Besides that? Hikaru lifted his eyes, calm as ever. I want the fourth Hokage to win. Minato's stare grew deeper. At that moment, he understood something important. Hikaru might not be speaking only for himself. He might represent a current within the Senju remnants. And win meant, reclaim true Hokage authority from the third Hokage's faction. Perhaps even restore the Senju's standing in Konoha's power structure. Minato searched Hikaru's eyes for hidden motives. But all he found was steady gentleness and controlled calm. After a long time, Minato asked. How do you want me to win? Hikaru answered immediately, as if he'd rehearsed this answer 1,000 times. Not by tearing the village apart. Not by harming Konoha. But by becoming the true Hokage through a method that doesn't require open conflict. Minato's voice lowered. Is that the Senju's position? No. Hikaru shook his head. That's my position. I haven't reported this back. Because within the Senju, there are people who... He stopped. Minato simply nodded. Extremists existed everywhere, that wasn't surprising. What did trouble him was something else. Could Hikaru truly represent the Senju? But then Minato let out a bitter inner laugh. Whether he could or not, what choice did Minato really have right now? Finally, Minato made his decision. I understand, Hikaru-kun. From now on, I want more information about ANBU, and about the internal parts of Konoha that I can't access, but you can. No problem, Hokage-sama. And in return, Minato's gaze stayed steady. I will personally teach you the Flying Thunder God technique. I want you to master it. Yes, Hokage-sama, hey. Personally teach? Wait, why not have Kushina teach him sealing techniques first? Chapter 43, Senior and Junior Brothers. Send some power stones please. Hikaru genuinely hadn't expected the outcome of this breakthrough meeting to be so mixed. Minato didn't trust him. Hikaru understood that perfectly. But he also understood something even more important. Minato didn't have many options right now. So, on a foundation of distrust, Minato chose a controlled amount of trust and decided he would judge Hikaru's real intentions through whatever intelligence Hikaru provided. Besides, Hikaru came with a stack of value tags that Minato could not ignore. Kakashi's former classmate, now someone Kakashi clearly trusted. A 5-year ANBU veteran who had become a squad captain low on the surface, but with access to plenty of internal currents. Those identities mattered. Minato needed them. And Minato also knew he couldn't directly solve the people at the minister level, let alone the division commanders. Someone like Hikaru was, realistically, the best kind of piece he could move right now. From weak to strong, step by step, Minato had always planned his path carefully. And to make continued contact with Hikaru smoother, he even chose to personally teach Hikaru the Flying Thunder God. Because Minato knew, for a Senju, the written records of Flying Thunder God were not the hard part. Hikaru's behavior had already proven that. He knew the technique. He could even activate the mark. What he lacked was a crucial piece, sealing technique mastery. But Minato also judged that teaching only basic sealing would not truly satisfy Hikaru. Since he had limited choices, he would at least extract the maximum possible gain from the choices he did have. War had taught Minato plenty. Even if he remained warm and kind, he still knew when to make a calculated decision. So teaching a complete Flying Thunder God something that visibly signaled trust was far more valuable than teaching a single sealing lesson. That logic made sense. The problem was, Hikaru was still stunned by it. Because with his cheat, mastering Flying Thunder God was not the terrifying mountain it would be for a normal shinobi. What he really wanted was a broader expansion of sealing knowledge. And now Minato had decided to personally step in. It made Hikaru's head ache. And worse, he couldn't refuse Minato's kindness. Fine. We'll do it that way. Sitting in the ANBU lounge, Hikaru let out a quiet sigh. This meeting's result wasn't perfect, but it was far better than most alternatives. At least Flying Thunder God had a clear path now. The rest was simple in concept. Within the next 10 months, fully master the technique, and find a way to obtain more sealing knowledge. Hikaru wasn't worried about whether he could master Flying Thunder God. With his cheat, he had absolute confidence. What he needed to watch was something else. Once he mastered it, how to unleash its full power in real combat. Anyone who truly grasped Flying Thunder God was never weak. Just look at the only 2 confirmed users. The second Hokage. The fourth Hokage. Their individual strength aside, the enemies they defeated, even the opponents they killed, proved what kind of sealing that technique had. Sealing techniques were the same. Only, sealing techniques had far more branches than Flying Thunder God. And in Hikaru's view, the potential of sealing was absolutely not inferior. Those rampaging tailed beasts, in the end, weren't they all disciplined into obedience the moment sealing came out? Tailed beasts were terrifying, especially to ordinary shinobi, and even to some cage-level fighters. But some clans could suppress them completely. Senju, physical domination. Uchiha, mental domination through genjutsu. Uzumaki, sealing that crushed both body and mind. Strictly speaking, Uzumaki sealing might not surpass Uchiha genjutsu or Senju would release in raw purity. But it had a brutal advantage. Double layer control. Locked the body. Let them see the world. Denied them freedom anyway. Hikaru didn't have wood release, maybe he simply hadn't found the right seed yet. So he was more than willing to invest time into sealing. And he certainly didn't believe sealing only mattered against tailed beasts. It could be deadly against humans too. The third Hokage's Reaper Death Seal against Orochimaru was a perfect example, sealing used as a killing move. Hikaru didn't plan to chase Reaper Death Seal. But he did consider other applications. Like directly sealing an enemy's chakra. Captain. A voice came from behind him. What are you thinking about? It's Kakashi. Hikaru turned slightly and smiled. Nothing much. Just thinking through some problems. I see. Kakashi didn't press. He simply sat down. By the way, my teacher wanted you. He's planning to teach me sealing techniques. Hikaru didn't bother hiding it. For him, the fact that Minato would teach Flying Thunder God was a useful banner. He even had deeper plans. And he was certain of one thing. If an ANBU squad captain maintained frequent contact with Minato, the third Hokage's side would eventually react. Once there was a reaction, Hikaru could harvest more benefits from it. Why hide a gift delivered to his doorstep? My teacher, personally teaching you sealing. Kakashi froze. Then shockingly he smiled. His eyes narrowed into crescents. Even without seeing his whole face, Hikaru could tell, Kakashi truly smiled. If that's the case. Kakashi's voice carried a faint lightness. Then we're senior and junior brothers now. That's true, Hikaru replied, calm, but we still have to wait for Hokage-sama to have time. Kakashi's eyes opened again, his expression returning to its usual quiet flatness. By the way, there's something you should know. You remember the 2nd Division's 5th Squad and 9th Squad that got wiped out? Of course. 2 of Hikaru's former subordinates had been reassigned to lead rebuilt squads. There was no way he'd forget. According to intelligence, Kakashi said evenly, they were killed by a single person. Oh. Hikaru's voice stayed gentle, but his attention sharpened instantly. Who could do that? Kakashi paused, then spoke the name with no flourish at all. It's connected to us, too. The one who killed them was Kakuzu. Hikaru fell silent. Chapter 44, It's complicated. Send some power stones please. Killed by Kakuzu. When Hikaru heard Kakashi say that, his brain short-circuited for a moment, then his expression turned awkward. Kakuzu really was petty. Back then, Hikaru had only chopped off the head Kakuzu wanted to sell for money. If he couldn't find the person to take revenge on, did he really have to vent his anger on other Konoha ANBU? Hikaru sighed internally. It was annoying, but he couldn't exactly complain. ANBU members were always among the most high-risk shinobi, especially those in pursuit and assassination units. People who went in with a succeed or die mindset were everywhere, and deaths from missions weren't rare at all. Being killed by Kakuzu, strictly speaking, that was normal in this line of work. And in a way, Kakashi had already avenged them at least partially. Kakashi destroyed one of that guy's Earth attribute hearts. Not enough to finish Kakuzu, but better than nothing. The revenge angle made Hikaru uncomfortable, but it didn't really change anything. It wasn't going to become a problem he couldn't handle. If anything, he should have been alert the moment Shinichi and Yae were reassigned. 2 people pulled from his squad, clean and precise. There was obviously intent behind it. At the time, Hikaru had assumed the division commander was trying to pressure Kakashi. But now it was clear that commander was reacting to Kakuzu and also sending Hikaru a quiet warning. Even if ANBU often got targeted, trouble you brought home yourself still earned a reminder. It really does connect back to us, Hikaru said with a soft sigh, then returned to his usual warm smile. But we don't need to obsess over it. We already reported everything ahead of time, didn't we? That's true, but... Kakashi sighed. It still feels hard to swallow. If we had just... Then we'd be the ones dead, Hikaru cut him off. And we did report it early. That information should have been passed along so everyone stayed alert. Hikaru knew what Kakashi meant: stay behind, coordinate, try to kill Kakuzu. Was it possible? Maybe. Hikaru knew Kakuzu's habits. He also hadn't gone all out the last time. If he and Kakashi coordinated perfectly, there might have been a chance. But a chance wasn't enough. For Hikaru, the rule was simple. Either absolute confidence, or don't do it. When he fought Kakuzu before, he had confidence he could escape cleanly, so he did it. But killing Kakuzu? Hikaru didn't even consider it worth the gamble. I get it, Kakashi said quietly, then shifted topics. What about our squad? You're the squad leader, but we're still short on people. 2 people short? It's not a big deal, Hikaru said casually. And even if we fill it, bringing in new members is a hassle. Training and syncing takes time. No need to rush. A squad could be 3 or 4 people including the leader. Hikaru's had been the standard 4. ANBU structure didn't change much, so they still had 2 open slots. But ANBU also had flexibility: unless the division commander specifically ordered a new addition, a squad could remain undermanned. The trade-off was obvious. Short-handed or not, your missions didn't stop. Hikaru understood that, but he really didn't care. Like he said, bringing in rookies was troublesome. New people came from the reserve pool, and after joining they needed a proper adjustment period. That period mattered, but it cost time. And the true geniuses in the reserve pool were usually already claimed. The ones left were average. Send those into missions without proper integration, and they'd die fast, often as little more than living shields. Hikaru had never openly done that. But he'd thought about it. The only reason he didn't was because ANBU inspections were brutal. If he came back and someone noticed something off, the consequences would be worse than the convenience. ANBU wasn't battlefield infantry. ANBU oversight was colder, tighter, and far more unforgiving. So we'll wait until there's a good opportunity, Hikaru said, patting Kakashi's shoulder with that gentle, harmless-looking smile. If we bring them in too soon, they'll die on missions because they weren't ready. Is that so? Kakashi nodded. Understood, Captain. And about last time, when I used the wrong title. I didn't cause you trouble, did I? Relax. It's fine, Hikaru smiled. And your follow-up was decent. I don't think it'll become a problem. Kakashi looked even more awkward. That wasn't follow-up. That was an actual combat sparring match where he got overwhelmed. But Hikaru interpreting it as cooperation made Kakashi feel like he couldn't even laugh properly. Then Kakashi noticed Hikaru pull out paper and a pen, writing something down. Kakashi's curiosity rose. Captain, what are you? For Hokage-sama, Hikaru said calmly, his voice dropping lower this time. Some things have to be stated clearly. And this is part of my assignment. An assignment? Kakashi drew a slow breath, then nodded and didn't ask further. Whatever task Hikaru had with his teacher, Whatever link existed between them. Kakashi didn't know it. And he didn't intend to ask. Because he could already tell. The truth behind it was far more complicated than he could imagine. Chapter 45, The Ownerless Treasure. Send some power stones please. Kakashi hadn't been wrong, this really was complicated. Of course, from Hikaru's perspective, it wasn't that complicated. He wasn't worried that reporting things this way inside ANBU would bring real trouble. In fact, among Konoha's organizations, internal surveillance over ANBU members was comparatively the weakest. Weak was relative checks still existed, and they were still strict. But Hikaru didn't care. First, it wasn't even certain anyone would see him. The spot he chose was hidden enough. Second, he wanted someone to see. If word accidentally reached the third Hokage, that wasn't necessarily dangerous. It was useful. Still, he wouldn't be blatant. If the traces were too obvious, it would look clumsy, and clumsy got you killed. Since he'd already made an arrangement with Minato, Hikaru was going to prepare proper materials for the next meeting, things he'd witnessed inside ANBU. Like the root members he and Kakashi ran into after returning from a mission. And even the existence of that underground facility. None of those had been reported during the first face-to-face meeting, and Minato hadn't pushed for it either. Because Minato knew Hikaru was still on duty. Night patrols weren't only handled by permanent village guards, ANBU ran them too. And ANBU patrols were nastier and riskier, meant to intercept spies leaking information out of the village, whether or not such efforts truly eliminated espionage. Every hidden village had spies. Everyone knew that. Sometimes the cage even used them on purpose. But cleanup still had to happen, especially for those who hadn't been identified before and had managed to secure real intel. And once you encountered those people, ANBU didn't capture and question. They removed the problem. That was dangerous work. Letting a target escape was dereliction. So Minato didn't waste Hikaru's time. Besides, Minato himself had slipped out in secret. He still needed to go back and be with Kushina. What Hikaru was doing now was preparation so that the next time Minato taught him Flying Thunder God, Hikaru could also present his sincerity. Once I learn Flying Thunder God, my strength should jump again. I wonder how my evaluation will change. He was genuinely curious. Right now, his overall rating was already J-nin, mainly because his fundamentals were absurdly high. Plus, he'd gained 2 chakra fruits, and he had earth release and water release techniques. That pushed him into J-nin territory even if his usable chakra reserve still only matched H-nin. Flying Thunder God's chakra cost scaled with distance. Which meant that if Hikaru used it for close quarters combat, even H-nin level pool could sustain it. The only issue would be the number of uses. And the combat value of Flying Thunder God was terrifying. Hikaru couldn't help wondering if, after mastering it, his overall combat rating would climb to Elite J-nin, maybe even Cage level. Of course, that was speculation. He'd know after learning it. And even after learning it, he'd probably limit its use to close-range combat at first. Long-range escape? He could forget that for now unless he found a better chakra source. Speaking of chakra sources, there are options. A tailed beast was the obvious one, but Hikaru didn't even consider it realistic. His current strength and position couldn't touch a beast, even if one broke free. The Nine Tails incident half a year from now could be an opportunity if he had sealing skill. But he didn't dare. He wasn't planning to flee to Akatsuki, and he wasn't planning to gamble away his future when his sights were already on the Hokage seat. He was Senju-blooded, legitimate by pedigree. If he played things correctly, he believed his odds were strong. He wasn't about to run off and follow the same path as Uchiha Madara, the man Senju Hashirama had once hammered into the dirt. So even if Kurama appeared, Hikaru wouldn't touch it. Other beasts were also a mess. Some weren't revived yet, like the Three Tails. Others were sealed in Jinchuriki under heavy guard. And some roaming Jinchuriki? He didn't trust himself to beat them, especially the one from Uegakuer. And who even knew whether the Four Tails Jinchuriki had already escaped? Villages and powerful shinobi could hide things far better than people assumed. Tailed beasts are out. So then. Hikaru paused. Because something clicked. There were 2 other potential chakra sources he remembered. One belonged to the Sky Ninja story Amaru and the Zero Tails. But she likely wasn't even born yet. And Hikaru didn't know enough details, when Zero Tails was created, how it was made, what Shin even did. He only knew it existed. He remembered a fortress and a few names, that was it. The other source, though. That one was clearer. It also came from original material, but it involved something far more interesting, a father and son meeting across time, Minato and Naruto. Time travel. Hikaru couldn't forget that, even if he tried. And because he remembered it so clearly, he also remembered the chakra source tied to it. The dragon vein. He knew its name. He knew its nature. He knew its location. And most importantly, he knew that right now, almost nobody would seriously guard it. Konoha had once cared Minato had sealed it, and even sealed parts of his own memory, meaning many details were lost. As for Tsunagakuer, their sealing skill was hard to praise. Even if the one-tail seal was strong, their broader sealing tradition was not. Just look at Gaara, people said he never truly slept. The dragon vein hidden in Rin. Hikaru's eyes narrowed. Once I've learned sealing, I can find a chance to go see it. After all, something with no owner is exactly the kind of treasure that can change everything for me. Chapter 46, A Clear Objective. Please send some power stones. With the target in mind, Hikaru suddenly had far better motivation. He also knew that with his current level, rushing off to find the dragon vein would end in something ugly. And with his present status, he couldn't just stroll out of the village whenever he wanted. But that didn't stop him from thinking about it, and he was certain that within the next few months, he could turn the idea into something reliable. That was for later. Right now, what he needed to do was simple: raise his strength properly, then plan step by step. Without strength, everything was just daydreaming. And in the world of shinobi, strength was one of the most important currencies. Strength. I wonder how far I can really go in the future. Sometimes, even Hikaru felt unsure. What kind of path could actually carry him into that realm where gods practically filled the sky? This era he lived in was, in many ways, the safest possible time. The two monsters from 50 or 60 years ago, people who could destroy a village with their own hands, were already dead. And during the decades after them, the shinobi world hadn't produced anything quite that absurd again. But in the next 10 plus years, gods would return. Or maybe cheaters was a better word. Uchiha Sasuke. Uzumaki Naruto. Those two were the type who could shatter the shinobi world by themselves. Just look at the enemies they ended up defeating, none of them were anything less. And yet the irony was that their cheat wasn't permanent. After their final battle, it seemed the Sage of Six Paths reclaimed that power. After them came an even stranger era, Boruto's time, where the gods were so ridiculous it felt less like shinobi, and more like aliens invading the world. All in all, Hikaru was satisfied with when he had arrived. Too early, and he was cannon fodder. Too late, and he was still cannon fodder. But now? Now he had room to grow and to think and to plan a route. At minimum, he still had a chance to complete that one unique mission tied to the greatest boss of the shinobi world. Still, this is a bloodline-driven world. A lot of high-end routes are basically locked in place. After thinking seriously, Hikaru couldn't help shaking his head. Low-level power could be played in countless ways. But at the high end, the road was often fixed. For the descendants of Indra and Asura, the best method was to obtain the other side's chakra, completing one's own power, or rather, one's own genes. But here was the issue. Hikaru was Senju descended, yes, but he was confident he wasn't Asura's reincarnation. Even if he could get close to Naruto and Sasuke, the two chosen cheat children, he didn't even know when their Indra/Asura chakra truly awakened. If it took too long, it would be meaningless for him. And worse if he managed to collect the set and that triggered some attention from the Sage of Six Paths, that would be the real disaster. The Sage of Six Paths. Satsuki Hago Romo isn't dead. At that level, how could he be? Knowing his limits, Hikaru basically decided not to touch the Indra/Asura route. The waters were too deep. He couldn't hold that line. But I have my cheat. I can obtain every chakra nature through it, that's my advantage. His eyes narrowed. The more chakra natures he had, the more complete he became. With the cheat, he didn't fear whether he could master them all. And with fully complete chakra natures, he could obtain something extraordinary. Truth-seeking orbs. Their power didn't need explanation. They crushed nearly all ninjutsu systems, and stood among the strongest weapons imaginable. And if all chakra natures fused completely, that's Keki Imrai. Keki Imra was the peak, terrifying, absolute, and capable of crushing every ordinary Keki Genkai. But the birth of Keki Imra was beyond what most people could even imagine. It required the fusion of 7 chakra nature transformations. How many bloodlines existed in the shinobi world? Hikaru didn't know. But he did know how rare they were. Most villages, with Kirigakura as an exception in certain ways, treated bloodline users as priceless. A standard Kekkei Genkai was already the extreme fusion of two natures. And in the modern shinobi world, only one person was known to hold a Kekkei. The third Tsuchikage, Noki. Even at 79 during the Fourth Shinobi World War, that old man still displayed destructive power and combat ability that left the world stunned. If someone who fused three natures could reach that level, then someone who fused seven? The scale of devastation was almost beyond language. And Hikaru, absurd as it sounded, actually had the foundation. Because of the cheat, he could acquire those natures far more easily than anyone else. Even the mastery wouldn't require him to grind himself into dust. The only headache left was, how to fuse them. But he also knew this wasn't something he should obsess over right now. Besides, maybe my cheat will eventually let me pull a fusion seed and produce a fusion fruit. Fusion was the hardest part, and also the most painful. But the cheat existing at all calmed him. He still didn't understand how it decided which chakra type could be extracted from which plant. But as long as extraction came from plants, he could experiment. For example, could he create a special plant that naturally held a fused property? If that didn't work, he could even dig into his clan's old texts, then if he absolutely had to go to Orochimaru and see if he could help. Of course, asking Orochimaru was the last resort. If possible, he would never go near that man. Because Orochimaru was too smart and too dangerous. Dealing with someone like that was a challenge. And worse, it was a challenge he didn't need. If Hikaru's strength could completely crush Orochimaru, then fine. But right now? Facing Orochimaru, Hikaru would probably end up like Kanon Kakashi chasing the rogue, having his mask shattered in a single move. With a quiet sigh, he looked down at the notes he'd filled until the page was dense with writing, and finally stopped his pen. Without realizing it, he'd written a lot while thinking. But that was fine. Even if it was longer than intended. It was still proof of his sincerity. Chapter 47, The Strange Room. Please send some power stones. After settling a few key matters, Hikaru's days became extremely regular. With no leave, he could only do the honest thing, go out on missions with Kakashi. Luckily, his assignment streak was good, nothing particularly difficult. Mostly patrol work, checking for spies, tracking missing nin slipping out of the village, or intercepting thugs pretending to be foreign shinobi while trying to stir trouble against Konoha. For Hikaru and Kakashi, it was all fairly easy. At least they didn't run into anyone like Kakuzu again, or a headache like Yoshimaru. It was almost funny in a way. Their first mission together ran straight into Kakuzu, basically cage class. Their second mission ran into Yoshimaru, an elite Jonin. And after that? The worst they faced was only Jonin level. Jonin were already the elite of a village. Even in Konoha, there weren't many. Maybe a bit over 200, give or take, though if you counted people by overall combat ability, the number might rise. But even if it doubled, compared to Konoha's population, it was still tiny. How many people did Konoha have? If you included civilians, well over 100,000 wasn't unrealistic. Against that kind of base, even twice the number of Jonin was still a laughably small group. Perhaps because the two of them kept performing so well, their captain didn't rush to fill the missing slots in Hikaru's squad. The captain probably understood Hikaru's stance. Training shinobi wasn't simple, especially ANBU. Even reserve candidates were precious. Before long, more than a month passed. Hikaru and Kakashi's consistent results earned them 3 days of leave. That made Hikaru genuinely happy. 3 days wasn't long, but for him, it was still prime time to use properly. And during that month of missions, he'd basically finished every sealing-related book he could access. Not just read memorized. What he lacked wasn't information anymore. He lacked systematic teaching, guidance that could turn memorized knowledge into real, functional finjutsu. Tomorrow the break starts. Tomorrow, I'll visit the 4th Hokage. After clocking out that night, Hikaru said goodbye to Kakashi and headed home alone. As he walked, he pulled up his status panel. He was curious what it looked like now. But when he actually checked it, surprise hit first, then delight. Name, Senju Hikaru. Gender, male. Birthday, Konoha calendar year 34, March 24th. Rank, Jonin, Chunin. Bloodline development, beginner, Senju's secret art. seeds. Jainin chakra capacity seed, maturity 60%. Advanced earth release seed, maturity 85%. Advanced earth release seed, maturity 71%. Advanced water release seed, maturity 71%. Fruits, none. Quest, become the true final boss of the shinobi world, unique. The advanced earth release seed's maturity went up again. He honestly hadn't expected that. His other seeds weren't completely stagnant, but the earth and water at only 1% progress each still made him go quiet for a moment. As for the chakra capacity seed, he didn't even want to look at it. If his bloodline development hadn't explicitly labeled Senju's secret art, and if his cheap parents weren't absolutely Senju, and if not for the after effects of what he'd done to himself as a kid, he might have started doubting whether he was even Senju descended at all. That chakra growth rate wasn't just embarrassing, it was tragic. Whatever. At least there's a pleasant surprise. He sighed, letting it go. Over the years, he'd gotten used to it. And the Senjutsu seed was a real surprise. Even if it was only intermediate level and therefore easier to cultivate, it still mattered. Because once he mastered an intermediate sage mode, his current foundation should explode into something much more frightening. And if I add Flying Thunder God on top of that? He didn't even dare continue that thought too far. He'd wondered before if the system would start judging him as cage level. Cage level was a qualitative jump. Far rarer than Jainin. Even at Konoha's absolute peak, there were only about 6 cage class figures holding the village up at once. Hiruzen Sarutobi, Dan's Shimura, Sakumo Hitaki, Orochimaru, Tsunade, and Jiraiya. That was Konoha's strongest era after the two-god period, and it had already passed. Still, he quickly shook his head. Even if he learned Flying Thunder God, he probably wouldn't truly qualify as cage level in sustained terms. His chakra reserves were still too small for long fights, and true cage class shinobi didn't have that weakness. But near cage by overall performance? That felt realistic. In this world, power rankings aren't as clear as the system makes them look. A genin could kill a jainin if the tactics were right and a kunao landed in the right spot. Still, having the system's evaluation gave him clarity about himself. And even near cage meant something important in this era. It meant he could survive. With a small smile, Hikaru found himself looking forward to Finjutsu and Flying Thunder God more than ever. He headed home quickly, and when he passed the elder's cabin, he slipped a scroll inside as usual. Then he lingered in the shadows until he confirmed someone inside took it. Only then did he return to his small house. When he stepped inside, he froze. His home had been cleaned. That was strange, he didn't remember hiring anyone to do that. And his room barely had anything in it. What was there to clean? Spider webs? An enemy? Or something else? He didn't understand, but he did what he always did, he checked everything carefully. After a thorough inspection, he became fully confident. Someone had simply come in and cleaned, nothing more. So what was this? Hikaru rubbed his head. Was the clan planning to arrange a fiancé for him or something? Major clans often had a benefit like that, arranged marriage. Hikaru was only 14, but engagement wasn't impossible. The thought made his expression turn awkward. Were they really going to introduce Renka to him? He shook his head, not bothering to chase the thought further. For now, he would sleep properly. Tomorrow, he was going to see Minato Namikaze. Chapter 48, Forest Appointment. Good morning, Hokage-sama. Ah, Hikaru-kun. Good morning. Early the next morning, Hikaru quietly appeared in a hidden stretch of forest. After a quick check of the surroundings, he directly used the Flying Thunder God mark Minato Namikaze had left behind and summoned him over. He wasn't going to run to the Hokage's office to look for Minato, and clearly, Minato didn't intend to do that either. So the best choice was simple, Hikaru would set the time himself, and he would be the one to call Minato. Sure enough, it didn't take long. Just like that night, Minato appeared silently in front of him. Facing him, Hikaru kept his usual gentle, harmless-looking smile and greeted him. Minato returned a warm smile as well, though he was also openly sizing Hikaru up. To be fair, the Senju bloodline might not compare to the Uchiha in certain ways, but it was still solid. And with Hikaru seemingly descending from the second Hokage's line, he had white hair and sharp features. Even Hikaru knew his case was unusual. Typical Senju had brown hair, but when the hair color mutated, the looks rarely suffered. Just look at Tobirama. Look at Tsunade. And then look at Hikaru. Still, Hikaru personally preferred black hair. That was what he'd had in his previous life, and white hair was simply too noticeable. Especially on stealth missions, white hair is practically a full moon in the dark. Unfortunately, genetics weren't something he could change. After so many years, he'd already gotten used to it. He'd never bothered dyeing it back. It seems you're prepared, Hikaru-kun. Minato finished looking him over and smiled. Then let's begin right away. Hokage-sama, before we start, I think you should look at this first. Hikaru shook his head lightly and handed him a scroll. Minato raised an eyebrow, accepted it, and opened it. He'd assumed Hikaru would want instruction first, and only hand over intelligence after. Looks like the kid had his own rhythm. Minato didn't dwell on it. He was genuinely curious what Hikaru had written. But as he read, his expression shifted then darkened. The scroll was essentially a record of what Hikaru had personally learned, and what he suspected, regarding ANBU en route. Minato had expected some of this. But seeing it laid out so clearly still rattled him. He knew exactly how ANBU's internal divisions were structured. The smaller subunits existed to keep the machine running smoothly. And yet, inside those units, Hikaru had marked key positions one after another as aligned with the third Hokage. The head of the ANBU interrogation team. The head of the ANBU intelligence team. 2 captains leading the active operations forces. Even the ANBU commander. With those people in place, it was easy to imagine who new ANBU recruits would truly be trained and ideologically shaped to obey. Even worse, the one division leader not marked as aligned with the third was instead marked as loyal to a mysterious person. That note made Minato's brow tighten. Someone else had their hand in ANBU too? After a long silence after Minato finished reading the entire scroll, his face became stern. Captain Hikaru. Minato's voice turned serious. Can you vouch for the truth of this report? Hokage-sama, I can't. Hikaru answered immediately. Some of it is what I personally witnessed, and some is my speculation. Then he added, without hesitation. Besides, Hokage-sama knows this too. Whether the information is true or not, I would still deny that this report exists. Correct. Minato fell silent. He couldn't refute that. With the Hokage title he carried, even he couldn't lightly admit something like this. And Hikaru was not only an ANBU captain, he was also Senju. Still, Minato couldn't help wondering, how could a mere squad captain reach this deep? As if reading his mind, Hikaru smiled. You're wondering how I had access to this sort of information, aren't you? He didn't wait for Minato to ask. Hokage-sama. I've been in ANBU for years, and I'm Senju. Do you really think I was only serving Konoha in a pure way? Even if I wanted that, my clan wouldn't. Minato's eyes narrowed slightly. So you also carried the task of investigating ANBU from the inside and reporting it back to your clan? Hikaru simply nodded, as if he had no fear of exposing that secret at all. Minato's gaze turned strange. He'd seen rumors and suggestions like this before, in half-finished investigations. But hearing it admitted so plainly was different. I assume you've seen similar intelligence too, Hokage-sama? Hikaru asked lightly, though it sounded more like a certainty than a question. Yes. Minato hesitated, then nodded. I've seen similar leads, but they were never confirmed and the inquiry was halted. That isn't surprising. Hikaru sighed softly. After all, ANBU was created by Lord Tobirama. The Senju once had deep influence inside it. That influence faded as the Senju declined, especially after Lady Tsunade left the village. But there are still people, and still families, who chose to lean toward us. That gives us access to information. And I've stayed inside ANBU the entire time. Naturally, I can confirm certain things from first-hand contact. So the intelligence in your hands, Hokage-sama, has been personally verified by me. Clan intelligence, verified by you. Minato murmured, and finally fell silent. Just as Hikaru said, even in decline, the Senju were still the Senju. They would still have their own channels. And with clan support, and with ANBU being Tobirama's creation in the first place. It wasn't strange at all that Senju hands could still reach into the village's core. And the scroll Hikaru had given him was clearly part of that clan network. Now you have the chance to grab the New Year discount on Patreon, subscribe and enjoy new chapters of your favorite FICS. Chapter 49, An Exchange of Information. In truth, Minato Namikaze was overthinking things, or perhaps Hikaru's ability to perform was simply too good. The Senju clan had once possessed its own intelligence network, but by now it was little more than a hollow shell. Back then, Senju Tobirama had created ANBU to keep the Uchiha in check, and then Root to counterbalance ANBU. In the process, nearly all of the Senju clan's information channels had been folded directly into the village's power structure. What remained of the Senju's independent intelligence network was pitifully small. The intelligence Hikaru had handed over, aside from a few clearly labeled speculations, was information he had painstakingly gathered himself over time. But that hardly mattered. Konoha could never know the Senju clan's true internal condition with absolute certainty. And that uncertainty gave Hikaru a perfect opening. He could say almost anything. After all, Minato could never be 100% sure, could he? Watching Minato's heavy, contemplative expression, Hikaru maintained his gentle smile. He could clearly sense the hesitation and inner conflict churning within the fourth Hokage. And that was exactly what Hikaru wanted. He had never expected to sway Minato with Naruto-like emotional resonance. From the very beginning, Hikaru had been carefully crafting a different image: reliable, courteous, trustworthy. But time was short. And more importantly, he was ANBU. Minato's hesitation meant he was thinking. And once Minato started thinking, Hikaru's chances rose dramatically. Even if Minato wanted to trust Sarutobi Hiruzen, the man who had promoted him, supported him, and helped him achieve his lifelong dream of becoming Hokage, reality forced him to reconsider. Hikaru had simply seized the one opening Minato couldn't ignore. After a long while, Minato finally nodded. "I understand. Thank you for this information. This is my duty, Hokage-sama," Hikaru replied with a smile. "But I still have some questions." Minato fixed his gaze on Hikaru, speaking slowly and carefully. "You handed over clan intelligence like this, are you certain that won't cause problems? And the ANBU captain you marked as loyal not to the third Hokage, but to a mysterious individual, do you have more details?" "Hokage-sama, please don't worry," Hikaru replied calmly. "I didn't report this to the clan, but for them, this may actually be good news." He deliberately kept his explanation vague, but he knew Minato would understand. And indeed, Minato nodded slightly. Hikaru had already stated this was his personal action, separate from the clan. Whether that was truly the case was another matter, but from Minato's perspective, even if the clan knew, they would likely pretend not to. Information would still be shared. Certain questions would never be asked. It was a classic case of hedging bets, placing eggs in multiple baskets. Nothing unusual about that. Unless you had no choice. After a brief pause, Hikaru continued, his voice unhurried. "As for that ANBU captain whose allegiance is unclear, I believe Hokage-sama has heard of one man." "Who?" Minato asked immediately. Hikaru smiled faintly. "Shimura Danzō." Minato froze. That name was far too familiar. Danzō was one of Konoha's true power holders, a man who had never hidden his ambition to become Hokage. Every shinobi dreamed of that seat. Danzō was simply more honest about it. But what confused Minato was why Danzō would reach into ANBU. ANBU was still firmly under the third Hokage's control. That arrangement had long been tacitly accepted. Was this an authorized move? Or a private one? Danzō already controlled Root. Why would he want ANBU as well? Could this be a mistake? Minato frowned. Or is there something more behind it? "Hokage-sama, that's not a question I can answer." Hikaru spread his hands slightly, looking utterly innocent. "I'm just an ANBU squad leader. I don't have access to that level of truth. But I can tell you this: the captain in question aligned himself with Danzō before you were appointed Hokage." "Before his appointment?" That would place it during the period when Minato had been nominated and was competing with Orochimaru. Suddenly, fragments of information snapped together in Minato's mind. At one point, Danzō had not openly supported Orochimaru. Rumors of Orochimaru's human experiments had been circulating widely throughout the village. Then something happened. Root was forced into reorganization. Those rumors faded. And Danzō shifted to support Orochimaru. Was it because of Root's restructuring? Minato thought grimly. Did Danzō attempt to secure control over ANBU as leverage, betting on Orochimaru's victory? The more he thought about it, the colder his spine felt. Konoha's internal power struggles were far deeper and far uglier than he had ever imagined. Was this truly the Hokage's position he had dreamed of? Taking a slow breath, Minato forced himself to calm down. He looked at Hikaru again, his expression complicated. If this intelligence was true, its value was immeasurable. If it was false, then Hikaru or perhaps the fallen Senju clan itself was attempting to destroy Konoha from within. I need to verify all of this personally, Minato decided. Every detail. The village that had always felt warm now seemed, for the first time, unbearably cold. After steadying his emotions, Minato spoke again. I understand. Thank you. This information is extremely valuable. Hokage-sama, there's no need for thanks, Hikaru said seriously, no longer smiling. These matters should be verified by you personally. Some things, none of us can be absolutely sure about. Minato nodded. He placed the scroll on the ground, formed a seal, and released a fire-style technique. The scroll ignited instantly, burning to ash. Thin smoke drifted upward. Watching the embers fade, Minato spoke calmly. Now then. It's time to begin. I'll personally teach you Fuinjutsu and the Flying Thunder God technique. Are you ready? Of course, Hikaru replied with a warm smile. Then, please instruct me, Hokage-sama. Don't miss out on the New Year discount offer on Patreon, subscribe and enjoy your favorite FICS. Chapter 50, A Sealing Type Seed. Minato Namikaze's teaching style was meticulous and unforgiving. Far more so than Hikaru had anticipated. To the point where Hikaru gradually realized something unsettling, Minato wasn't teaching him like a collaborator or an exchange partner at all. He was teaching him like a true disciple. Since when did this turn into that kind of situation? Hikaru was genuinely bewildered. He had expected Minato to teach seriously after all, he had handed over a great deal of sensitive intelligence, and even if Minato needed to personally verify it, proper instruction was a reasonable exchange. But this went far beyond that. There was no holding back. No reservation. From the most basic foundations of Fuinjutsu onward, Minato explained everything in painstaking detail. During breaks, he would even casually share his own insights into the Flying Thunder God technique, speaking as though he were passing on accumulated experience rather than guarded secrets. It felt disturbingly close to imparting everything he knew. The phrase itself made Hikaru cringe too many bad connotations from his previous life, but it fit the situation uncomfortably well. And the results were undeniable. Even though Hikaru's progress in practical sealing was still painful to look at, he could clearly feel that he was approaching the threshold of completing his first true seal. Hard to say when, though. Maybe a month, maybe longer. Hikaru reflected calmly. With his cheat, once he successfully completed a technique, it would effectively mean full mastery at that stage. But that first successful execution was still the key. He had tried. Once, in fact. Unfortunately, the seal had collapsed midway for a variety of reasons. Hikaru's practical Fuinjutsu performance is still rather disappointing. And regrettably, there was no kindly landlord lady to magically smooth things over. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Though Hikaru's practical sealing remained unsatisfactory, his theoretical foundation had expanded dramatically. Combined with Minato's direct instruction, even the Flying Thunder God, something he had barely touched, now felt far more comprehensible. It could be said that everything was ready. All that was missing was the right wind. And over these 3 days, Minato's attitude toward me has also changed. Hikaru was keenly observant, and his sensory abilities only sharpened that edge. Even the subtlest shift in Minato's demeanor did not escape him. Hikaru suspected Minato had already confirmed some of the intelligence he had provided, through his own channels. Which parts had been verified didn't really matter. Any confirmation worked in Hikaru's favor. Even if there were inaccuracies, they were well within acceptable bounds. He had never claimed his intelligence was flawless. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Minato smiled at Hikaru. That will be all for now, Hikaru. Our instruction will have to stop here for the time being. Hikaru needed to return to ANBU duty, and Minato could not disappear indefinitely. But in truth, Minato's impression of Hikaru had changed significantly over these 3 days. First, he had verified parts of the intelligence. What he uncovered was unsettling. Yet it also gave Minato a far clearer understanding of his own position within Konoha. Even if everything had not been fully confirmed, Hikaru had already proven his value. And Minato knew now he needed this young man. Second, Minato had developed genuine appreciation for Hikaru's talent. Hikaru's theoretical understanding of Fuinjutsu was exceptionally solid. It was obvious he had spent a great deal of time studying in private. Failing to complete a seal at this stage was not a flaw, it was normal. Fuinjutsu was far more complex than ordinary ninjutsu. Minato still vividly remembered his own experience learning sealing techniques. Even under Kushina's personal guidance, it had taken him a full month to complete his first seal. Compared to that, Hikaru's pace was more than acceptable. And if Hikaru truly mastered the Flying Thunder God, from Konoha's perspective, setting aside all personal interests, that would be an unquestionable gain. The village was weak right now. And Minato was willing to teach talent when he saw it. Thank you for your instruction, Hokage-sama. Hikaru smiled sincerely and bowed deeply. Without your guidance, I wouldn't have progressed this quickly. I truly appreciate it. There's no need, Minato replied gently, placing a hand on Hikaru's shoulder. You're a shinobi of Konoha, after all. After a brief pause, he added quietly. If there is an opportunity, I would be willing to become your teacher. Hikaru understood immediately. Thank you for the honor, Hokage-sama, he replied softly. If that opportunity comes, I would gladly call you sensei. If. Which meant not yet. Minato still lacked complete certainty about Hikaru's intentions. And Hikaru himself was not yet ready to bind his fate entirely to Minato's path. The timing was uncertain. Perhaps soon. Perhaps never. Before you go, Minato said, I'll give you one more thing. He walked over to a nearby tree and pressed his palm against its trunk. Chakras surged. The next instant, a Flying Thunder God formula appeared on the bark. It was incomplete and unpersonalized, foundational version of the seal. But Hikaru's eyes lit up instantly. Minato wasn't showing him the technique. He was showing him the sealing structure. This is the most basic Flying Thunder God formula, Minato explained with a smile. Study how it's constructed. I believe it will be very useful to you. Thank you, Hokage-sama. Hikaru's smile was bright and genuine this time. This was extremely useful. Then I'll take my leave, Minato said. We'll meet again the next time you're off duty. Yes, Hokage-sama. With that, Minato vanished quietly, cleanly, like he had never been there at all. Flying Thunder God. Hikaru stared at the empty space, unable to deny his envy. But he was patient. The future is promising, at least. Stretching lazily, he leaned back against the tree, finally allowing himself to rest after a full day of intense training. And then, something stirred in his mind. Detected, special attribute plant. Analyzing. Analysis complete. Result, sealing type seed, basic. Chapter 51, an investment. What the hell is this supposed to be? Back home, Hikaru flopped onto his bed, his mind in total chaos. Because he genuinely could not understand one thing. Why on earth could a random tree produce a sealing technique seed? He wasn't without guesses. The most plausible explanation was that Minato had left the Flying Thunder God formula on that tree, and that was what allowed this new seed to form. After all, only that could explain it. But what made Hikaru miserable was this. The way he'd obtained seeds in the past didn't work like this at all. The speed type seed came from bamboo, the strength type seed came from a cypress, the reaction type seed was some accidental harvest from a flower. Hikaru stared at the yellow seed in his palm, replaying the old moments in his head. Earth chakra seed, water chakra seed, even the sage chakra seed, they all came from plants or trees. Except wind chakra, which I still haven't figured out, but even that was from some completely unremarkable tree. So why is this one so special? Unless, the seeds I got before weren't natural either, maybe they also absorbed some kind of power like this, and that's how their attributes were born. The more he thought, the worse his headache became. In the end, Hikaru let out a long sigh and gave up. He would test it thoroughly. For example, I can have Kakashi blast a tree with lightning release, then I'll try extracting from it and see what happens. Once he made the decision, he stopped obsessing. If he was right, he could save an unbelievable amount of time in the future. If he was wrong, then so what? He'd survived this long already. He could treat today as nothing more than a strange coincidence. But what do I do with this seed? And that was the next headache. He had never planned on getting a sealing type seed, so he'd poured effort into learning Fuinjutsu the hard way. Now that the seed had appeared, he was happy, and yet deeply conflicted. Happy, because this could dramatically improve his sealing talent and ability. It would let him spend less time grinding fundamentals and more time focusing on combat application. But conflicted, because planting seeds took time. Even a basic seed would likely take more than a month. A month from now, he might have learned Fuinjutsu on his own anyway. And there was an even bigger issue. He had already planted enough seeds. The painful lesson from childhood still haunted him. He already had 4 seeds growing inside him. His chakra was being divided and drained constantly. Adding one more? Who knew what that would do? Even if it was only a low-tier seed. My chakra is already barely enough as it is. If I add another, who knows if it'll drop to the point where I can't even fight properly. Hikaru's heart felt like it was being pulled in 2 directions. He hadn't even dared to plant the wind chakra seed before. So why would he dare now? And then, Flying Thunder God flashed through his mind. That temptation was unbearable. He struggled for a long time. Finally, he gritted his teeth. Plant it. He thought viciously. 1 month. As long as I don't get assigned some insane mission, my current strength is enough. And I refuse to believe I'll run into someone like Kakuzu again. For ordinary enemies, Kakashi is enough. For real trouble, I'll just activate Sage Mode. The allure of Fuinjutsu especially now was on a completely different level compared to normal chakra attribute seeds. At least, it was for him. To prevent his resolve from wavering, Hikaru acted immediately. He clenched the seed in his palm. A soft green chakra shimmer appeared around his hand. The sign of his bloodline technique, Senju's secret art. As the green chakra pulsed, Hikaru clearly felt the seed slip into his body. Slowly, the yellow seed flowed with his blood toward the area near his heart. And then it settled there, taking root. At once, Hikaru felt his chakra begin pouring into it, nourishing it. And the seed started to change. Name, Senju Hikaru. Gender, male. Birthday, Konoha calendar year 34, March 24th. Rank, Chunin, Jainin. Bloodline development, basic, Senju secret art. Seeds. Jainin chakra capacity seed, maturity 60%. Intermediate sage seed, maturity 82%. Advanced earth release seed, maturity 71%. Advanced water release seed, maturity 71%. Basic sealing type seed, maturity 1%. Fruits, 0. Quest, become the true ultimate boss of the shinobi world, unique. As expected, my chakra dropped again. Feeling that steady pull, his chakra being siphoned to feed the new seed, Hikaru's chest ached. His chakra had never been abundant to begin with. Now it felt like he'd added another layer of suffering on top. But he didn't regret it. Once Hikaru made a decision, he didn't look back. When weighing benefits, Flying Thunder God was simply stronger at this stage, no contest. And Hikaru was smart enough to choose accordingly. That's done. For the next month, I need to be careful. His eyes narrowed slightly. And also, I spent 3 straight days with the 4th Hokage. I wonder what kind of reaction the 3rd Hokage is having right now. Hiruzen's surveillance over Minato was heavy, so heavy that calling it strict wasn't even enough. Minato couldn't even freely meet people alone inside the Hokage's own office. If that wasn't suffocating control, what was? And Hikaru still remembered something vividly from the Kakashi arc back when he'd watched the anime. Orochimaru had bluntly stated why Hiruzen chose Minato. Because Hiruzen needed an obedient puppet. Nothing more. Now that obedient puppet is suddenly spending time with a Senju descendant. I wonder what the so-called strongest Hokage in history, the 3rd Hokage, is thinking. Hikaru tilted his head, genuinely curious. And now he would wait. He would wait for the 3rd Hokage's move. Minato had guessed one thing right, and one thing wrong. Yes, Hikaru was investing on both sides. Putting all eggs in one basket was the most dangerous option. But this time, Hikaru's actions represented only himself. Not the Senju clan. Not at all. Chapter 52, A New Mission. Hikaru knew it himself, whether or not he dragged the Senju clan into the mess, the Senju were already on the board. His identity alone had already decided too many things he couldn't change even if he wanted to. But he had neither the mood nor the intention to notify the clan. To be blunt, his voice in the Senju wasn't that strong. Among the younger generation, he was doing fine, yet as an ANBU member, he rarely interacted with same-age clan youths at all. And among the middle-aged and elder generation, his age, status, and visible abilities simply didn't earn him much weight. Of course, that was partly because Hikaru himself was hiding keycards. Sage Mode, for example, he had never revealed it to anyone. To him, Sage Mode was his single most important trump card. Unless there was a truly special reason, he would never expose it unless he decided it had become necessary. For now, I'll leave it like this, Hikaru thought. Once I get what I want, I'll have time to deal with the clan problem slowly. After a full night's rest, Hikaru arrived at ANBU early the next morning to clock in. To his surprise, Kakashi was already there, sitting alone in a corner, quiet and waiting. "Morning, Kakashi," Hikaru said with a gentle smile as he walked over. "How were the last 3 days?" "They were, okay," Kakashi replied softly, lifting his head. "I'm just not used to it yet." "Used to what?" "Everyone being so enthusiastic." During the 3-day break, Kakashi had tried tentatively to reconnect with his old friends. He didn't even have to look. Might Guy and the others came to him on their own. After a long time of being cold and distant, Kakashi was finally trying to interact again, to feel that warmth again. But after living in a near-empty, hopeless state for so long, even after Hikaru's guidance, even after he'd thought through many things, his old coldness wasn't something he could just switch off. He was adapting as best he could, but it still felt unfamiliar. Hikaru could guess what Kakashi meant. He smiled and patted Kakashi on the shoulder. "It's fine. Take it slow. You've already taken the most important step." "Yeah," Kakashi nodded. "I know." He didn't say much more after that. But Hikaru could tell Kakashi actually seemed to enjoy those moments, even if he didn't know how to handle them yet. Even the coldest people long for sunlight. Even ice has warmth inside. Sooner or later, warmth melts frost. Just look at Kakashi in the future. He lived with Obito's shadow, sure, but he still changed. Then Kakashi's expression turned faintly strange. He looked at Hikaru, opened his mouth slightly, and then seemed to stop himself, unsure what to say. During the break, Kakashi had learned some interesting details from Guy, especially about that Uchiha girl from the training ground. Hikaru had said she was an old classmate. Nothing more. But from Guy, Kakashi learned something else. After Hikaru left the academy, that girl seemed to keep a close eye on him. Even though she hadn't seen him, she knew Hikaru was close with Guy and used Guy to learn about him. That kind of attention didn't feel so simple. Luckily, Kakashi also knew Guy didn't understand Hikaru's real situation. Otherwise, his mind might have drifted into spy territory. "What's wrong?" Hikaru noticed Kakashi's look. "Your eyes are kinda weird." "It's nothing," Kakashi hesitated, then decided not to stir trouble. "I was just wondering if you met with my teacher during the break." "I did," Hikaru replied. "The Hokage treated me very well." His expression became faintly subtle. "I learned a lot." That's good, that's good." Kakashi gave an awkward chuckle, and that was the end of it. Mentioning that topic made Hikaru instinctively think of his now even worse chakra reserves. Meanwhile, Kakashi clearly didn't want to pry. So the two of them fell into silence. But it didn't last long. The squad leader suddenly entered the break room. Everyone stood at once. Respecting rank was basic shinobi discipline, and ANBU, being even more militarized, took it seriously. The squad leader swept his gaze across the room, then fixed his eyes on Hikaru and Kakashi. "Nightingale. Kakashi. You two come with me." "Yes, Captain." Hikaru and Kakashi followed immediately, but they exchanged a quick look. Both of them understood. Their quiet days were over. If the captain was singling them out, it meant a troublesome assignment was coming. Hikaru didn't refuse missions, but his situation was awkward right now. He had been thinking maybe he should lie low for a month, keep a low profile, avoid drawing attention. Instead, he was being dispatched on his very first day back. "Come in," the captain said at an office door, entering first. "Yes." Hikaru and Kakashi stepped inside. "Read this," the captain said, handing them a file. "This mission isn't too difficult, but it's somewhat complicated." "Complicated?" Hikaru unfolded the document and read it alongside Kakashi. He'd received missions as written files before. Usually, when they handed the document directly to you to read, it meant the mission wasn't outrageously high risk, but it did tend to be annoying. Still, the captain specifically emphasizing complicated caught Hikaru's interest. As he read, Hikaru's brow slowly furrowed. The report described a place in the Land of Fire called Shaoki City. Strange incidents had been happening there. According to local accounts, the region had once been its own country, later absorbed into the Land of Fire, but certain old place names remained. Shaoki City was one of them. Now, something about the city had become deeply unsettling. Inside the city stood a castle. And those who visited that castle had an alarming tendency to vanish. Sometimes individual disappearances. Sometimes entire groups disappearing at once. Naturally, such a bizarre pattern caught Konoha's attention. Konoha had previously sent a squad to investigate. Unfortunately, that squad, including the Chunin team leader, disappeared completely. And that was why the case had now fallen into ANBU's hands. Chapter 53, People are harder to deal with than monsters. This mission. On the road to Shaoki City, Hikaru found himself turning the assignment over and over in his head. He had no intention of refusing it. Sure, it was complicated, and they still had to figure out what was really going on, but strictly speaking, it was far easier than assassination, hunting, or interception work. Most importantly, the time limit was a full half-month. Half a month was enough for Hikaru to shamelessly drag his seed progress forward by a huge margin. By his estimate, when the deadline came, he'd probably be sitting at 50 or 60%. And beyond all that, there was an odd sense of familiarity. I saw this somewhere before, manga? Anime? He racked his brain. He'd been in this world for 13 or 14 years already. There was no way he could remember every detail with perfect clarity. Even though he'd started keeping a journal early on, and flipped through it now and then to make sure he didn't miss anything truly important, it still only recorded major events. There were plenty of smaller incidents like the Sky Ninja Village that simply weren't worth writing down line by line. Wait. Shaoki City, don't tell me. Hikaru's expression turned a little strange. After a long moment of digging through memory, something clicked, something interesting. If it's that, then this mission is going to be fun. He kept the thought to himself. The two of them moved fast. In a single day, they reached a small town near the fire capital. After making brief contact with the local ANBU garrison, they rented rooms at an inn and settled in. They had time. There was no need to rush. What Hikaru didn't expect was that, late at night just as he was about to rest, Kakashi came knocking. What's up? Hikaru opened the door and let him in, eyebrow lifting. Can't sleep? Want to go grab a drink? Don't joke around, Captain. We can't drink. Kakashi shook his head, voice serious. Hikaru clicked his tongue. He had no idea which brain-dead idiot had made that rule. In the shinobi world, you couldn't drink unless you were 18. Never mind that you might be a ninja who'd killed more people than you could count. If you weren't old enough, you weren't allowed. In other words, killing was fine. Alcohol wasn't. Hikaru gave up on that line of thought, shut the door, and offered a mild, gentle smile. Troubled by the mission? Can't sleep because of it? Yes, Captain. Kakashi nodded and sat down. This mission doesn't clearly state who the enemy is. But I have a bad feeling. Something's off. Oh. Hikaru's brow arched. Kakashi's analytical ability was top tier. Hikaru wanted to see what he'd caught. Go on. The missing people. Kakashi's tone stayed calm. That castle in Shaoki City. Over the past century, there are records of groups of people disappearing at intervals. There's a pattern. Not everyone who goes in vanishes. Not everyone. Hikaru watched Kakashi's serious face and, inwardly, nodded. Sharp as ever. A pattern meant you could rule out a lot of possibilities. And following Kakashi's logic, it narrowed down to two outcomes. If we assume there's a pattern, Hikaru repeated thoughtfully, as if tasting the word, then continued in a smooth tone, then we can infer two possibilities. 1. An unknown organization or even a village. Maybe even our own snatching people. Human experimentation. Kakashi frowned, the crease deepening. If that's the case, this gets messy. There's another possibility. Hikaru cut him off, his voice dropping, almost conspiratorial. That castle has a serious problem. Or rather, maybe it isn't a castle at all. Maybe it's a beast. Something worse. A monster. Kakashi's eyes sharpened instantly. Captain, you mean it's feeding? Hikaru gave a small nod. In his memory, there weren't that many people bold enough to run human experiments, at least not openly. They still had to be careful, who knew whether something outside the original story had crawled out of the shadows. But Hikaru also knew one thing: if some third-rate organization was operating in the Land of Fire, it wasn't doing so without a death wish. Konoha's deterrent was real. Unless someone powerful was sheltering them, nobody gambled their life that casually. Danzō and Orochimaru were the perfect examples. If they hadn't had Hiruzen quietly covering the mess behind the scenes, and Root keeping everything buried, their experiments would have exploded into daylight long ago. And in this case, what they were walking into really was a monster. If it's a monster, that's actually better. Hikaru reached out and patted Kakashi's shoulder, smiling lightly. Because people are always harder to deal with than monsters. Kakashi seemed to catch his meaning. You mean, the human heart is unpredictable? Hikaru nodded once. So we prepare for both. Kakashi started to speak, but Hikaru cut in before he could finish. Whether it's a monster or an organization, we confirm the truth first. And we stay ready to move the moment we have to. That was all that needed to be said. Kakashi understood what to do. Hikaru wasn't worried about some secret faction this time. Handling the creature would be enough. He couldn't recall its exact appearance. Aside from knowing it was a giant lizard of some kind, he didn't have details, and he wasn't sure how strong it truly was. But his earlier point stood. People were harder than monsters. If I remember right, the summoning scroll is in that thing's stomach. As long as we're careful and get the scroll. Hikaru had always been cautious, yes. But caution didn't mean cowardice. When it was time to be confident, he had plenty of it. In this era, the Mangeki Sharingan still wasn't something that popped up everywhere. Nagato was crippled and busy forging his six paths puppets in the shadows. The world ceiling, for now, was still the various cage and monsters like Kakuzu. Last time, he and Kakashi had escaped Kakuzu. Kakuzu had underestimated them, sure, but that didn't change the fact, Hikaru wasn't weak. He was confident that even in his current state, he had a real chance against a normal Jonin, and even against some ordinary elite Jonin, he wouldn't be helpless. And if he truly couldn't win? Running was never that hard. With Sage Mode in hand, even if it doesn't last long, it's more than enough for a clean getaway. Hikaru watched Kakashi leave. He didn't see him out. Instead, he sat on the edge of the bed and thought quietly. Besides, one of the things I'm best at is getting away. Body flicker, escape routes, honestly, I'm pretty good at running. Chapter 54, The Only Real Trouble. Once they had a clearer direction in mind, Hikaru and Kakashi began preparing in earnest. This mission only came with a rough outline, no concrete details at all, so most of the intelligence had to be gathered by them personally. That was precisely why ANBU had given them a full half-month to complete it. Half a month was no small allowance. ANBU's numbers were limited, and every operative was an elite. In that amount of time, a team could easily complete multiple missions of considerable importance. Hikaru and Kakashi weren't the kind of ANBU dispatched to infiltrate other villages. In Konoha, that sort of long-term external assignment had already been claimed by Root. It was a decision made back in the second Hokage's era, intended to prevent ANBU from becoming too powerful and centralized. The third Hokage had tried more than once to reclaim that authority, but with little success. For Hikaru, that arrangement was actually a blessing. At least he didn't have to worry about being sent deep into another country's hidden village, lying low for 3 years, then another 3. Information gathering was, by nature, a dull affair. Still, it was also a perfect excuse to slack off, and Hikaru wasn't about to pass that up, even if he already had a decent idea of the truth. After several days, his ceiling-type chakra seed had reached 12% maturity, almost exactly in line with his expectations. That said, slacking off didn't mean neglecting appearances. And besides, Hikaru really had noticed something off. The moment they entered Shaoki City, he sensed it. Someone was watching them. Hikaru trusted his perception more than almost anything else. He was certain he wasn't mistaken. What puzzled him was who was doing the watching. The surveillance became even more pronounced when they approached Shaoki Castle and the desolate cemetery outside the city walls. Who is it? Is there some unexpected variable here? Hikaru wasn't sure. After all, his arrival was a full 16 years earlier than when Naruto and the others would eventually get involved. It wouldn't be strange if some details had changed. That night, in Hikaru's room, he and Kakashi sat down to exchange what they'd learned and make a final assessment. At this point, Hikaru said calmly, "We can basically rule out human experimentation. There's no evidence at all. If it were human experimentation, there would be traces no matter how careful they were. Personnel transfers alone would leave signs, and the experimental site wouldn't be far away. There's no way nothing would remain. Then there's the disposal of bodies after the experiments. That too would leave clues. We've found none of it. So I don't think we need to consider that angle any further. Human experimentation was an extremely complex undertaking. No matter how it was handled, it always left something behind. Because of the surveillance, Hikaru had been especially thorough in his checks these past few days. He'd genuinely suspected some hidden organization might be operating here. Even if sealing techniques were used to cover things up, he didn't believe anyone could do it more cleanly than Konoha's route. Just look at the Akatsuki, the most dangerous enemy the shinobi world currently faced. Their research into sealing techniques was mediocre at best. Even their method of sealing tailed beasts relied primarily on the Rinnegan's abilities. As for Kara, Hikaru couldn't even be sure whether that organization existed yet. The timeline was simply too early. In the end, he'd found nothing. Nothing except the fact that someone was watching him. So we assume it's a monster, then? Kakashi asked quietly. He'd done plenty of investigation himself. But I haven't found any signs of movement. No tracks. Not even evidence of waste. Maybe it doesn't need to leave any. Hikaru replied casually. Some creatures have stomach acid strong enough to dissolve even bone. There are plenty of examples. Orochimaru-sama's snake, for one. Orochimaru's giant snake was famous in Konoha. Hikaru remembered its name Manda. Back during the war, he'd heard that Orochimaru had unleashed Manda on the battlefield in the land of whirlpools, where it swallowed more than 50 shinobi in one go, utterly crushing Kirigakuru's morale. The snake had an atrocious temperament, and it was later blown apart by Deidara, but there was no denying it was a strategic-level existence. Veterans from the battlefield had said that after devouring over 50 shinobi, Manda showed no ill effects whatsoever. No waste. No visible digestion issues. For creatures of that size, that number probably wasn't even enough to make them feel full. And Hikaru knew that the giant lizard masquerading as Shaoki Castle had maintained this state for over a decade. The fact that it hadn't been exposed meant its biology clearly didn't cause problems like that. People went missing periodically, yes, but the numbers were likely just enough to sustain it. Captain, speaking of monsters, there's something I remembered, Kakashi said after thinking for a moment. There's a legend about Shaoki City's last ruler, Shaoki Castle. He supposedly had an enormous summoned beast. Captain, you don't think that it could be? Yet. Very likely. Hikaru's eyes glinted faintly, and a small smile appeared on his lips. Enormous size. Immense strength. Starving, forced to feed on humans. It attacks people and eats them, but its behavior is restrained, passive, even. Combined with what you just said, I'm confident I know exactly what we're dealing with. Since Kakashi had already arrived at the answer, Hikaru saw no reason not to confirm it. Shaoki Castle, the name itself wasn't especially clear in Hikaru's memory. Remembering the giant lizard was enough. As for where that man was now? Hikaru didn't know. But Shaoki City had already been annexed. Was it safe to assume the man was dead? If so, perhaps his resentment before death had bound his summoned beast here, leaving it to guard this place. If that was the case, then Hikaru had just avoided a major headache fighting not only a summoned beast, but also its summoner. He'd already set his sights on that lizard. Yes, its actions were brutal, feeding on humans, but the shinobi world had always been a world that devoured people. Hikaru himself didn't know how many lives were already on his hands. He wasn't about to moralize over an animal's instincts. If anyone deserved blame, it was the wars of the Land of Fire or Shaoki Castle, for leaving such a creature behind in the first place. The fewer complications, the better. No one knew what level Shaoki Castle had been at in life. For now, the only real trouble, Hikaru said softly, is the people watching us. But I might have a way to deal with that. Chapter 55, The Graveyard. Hikaru hadn't forgotten for a second that someone was watching him. For an ANBU operative, being tailed meant one thing: you were doing a terrible job. And judging by how those watchers behaved, there was a high chance they were connected to this case. If that was true, Hikaru had no intention of letting them slip away. They hadn't appeared in the original story, sure. But for all he knew, Naruto's savior halo had simply carried him through so smoothly that these people never got a chance to show their faces before they were quietly erased by time. Hikaru remembered this mission. Naruto had taken it. And Naruto's luck aside from the first 13 miserable years was basically absurd after that. Once the wheel turned, it turned hard. So for Naruto, this mission had gone off without a hitch, aside from a little trouble inside the lizard's belly. The only pity is, that idiot tore the scroll. Thinking of Naruto's original solution made Hikaru sigh. Wasteful didn't even begin to cover it. He shook his head and forced himself not to dwell on Naruto's antics. Right now, his priorities were clear: find the scroll, and figure out who the hell had been watching him. He did have a guess. What if the people tailing him were actually Shaoqi City's remaining descendants, survivors of the old regime? Shaoqi Castle was dead. If he'd died full of resentment watching his homeland swallowed and his rule extinguished, then the last thing he would want was for someone to retrieve the scroll and set the summoned beast free. That left two logical choices. 1. Hide it in his own grave. The dead were treated as sacred. Grave robbing wasn't unheard of, but it was rare. In this world, disturbing the sleep of the dead was somehow seen as more disgusting than killing the living. Hikaru had never understood which idiot decided corpses mattered more than breathing people, but at the moment, he was grateful for that absurdity. It made a grave a far safer hiding place. 2. Hide it inside the castle. But that was even simpler. The castle was the summoned beast's body. Entering it was the same as stepping into its stomach. Anyone who went in was effectively being eaten. Who would have time to search for a summoning scroll? In the original story, Naruto found the scroll inside the lizard's belly. But if you added the existence of Watchers and assumed they were Shaoqi's leftover heirs, then another possibility formed. Maybe those people had guarded the scroll while they lived. And when they could no longer hold out, they tossed it into the lizard's stomach, and died there themselves. Hikaru remembered the bones in that place, armored warriors reduced to dry skeletons. If that was the truth, then Hikaru needed to meet these Watchers even more. Kakashi, he said once his thoughts were in order, go back and rest. Tomorrow, we start the operation. Yes, Captain. Kakashi stood immediately, clean and decisive as always. But he hesitated just a beat. How do we proceed? Simple. Hikaru's voice stayed even. After we confirm a few things, we go straight into the castle. If we're lucky, we won't even need to enter. I understand. Kakashi didn't pry. He turned and left. Then I'll head back, Captain. The door clicked shut softly behind him. Hikaru was pleased. Whether it was trust in his leader or simple disinterest, Kakashi's lack of pointless questions suited Hikaru perfectly. Hikaru rose, slipped on his mask, pushed open the window and jumped. If he'd made a decision, he wouldn't drag his feet. Whether the Watchers were exactly what he suspected didn't even matter anymore. Watching ANBU wasn't a smart move. He didn't know where Shaoqi Castle's grave was, but he did remember one thing: outside the city was a graveyard. And it was one of the places where the Watchers' reactions had been strongest. He moved fast. In a little over half an hour, he reached the cemetery. And along the way, that faint, lingering gaze locked onto him again, clearer than before. The closer he got, the heavier it became. As expected, Hikaru thought coolly. So there really is something interesting buried here. At first, he'd wondered if some secret organization was conducting research in the area. But he'd already swept the region with his perception. There was no hidden base. No underground lab. Nothing. He'd also probed the Watcher's chakra. At most, Genin-level reserves. The rest were mostly Chunin and Genin. That kind of lineup was annoying, but manageable. Hikaru was confident he could handle it. It would be troublesome. He'd probably need Sage Mode. But so what? If paying a small price gets me a summon whose size is likely comparable to the Sunin's, then no matter how you look at it, it's worth it. He slowed, lowered his presence, and stepped into the graveyard. Whether by design or coincidence, towering trees stood thick around its edges, blocking the moonlight cleanly. The cemetery was pitch black, not a trace of light slipping through. All he could hear was the distant, mournful cries of animals and the wind scraping through branches with a sound like weeping. Dust hung in the air. Rot and ruin clung to everything. Even for someone like Hikaru, the place felt uncomfortable. He drew a slow breath, ignoring the stench, forcing his mind to settle. He didn't believe in ghosts. He didn't fear them either. But the atmosphere was undeniably oppressive, especially now that the owners of those hidden gazes were starting to approach openly, no longer bothering to hide. Done playing tricks? Hikaru spoke at last. This time, his voice carried none of its usual warmth. It was cold, edged, and it echoed through the cemetery. Paired with the low moan of the wind, it made the darkness feel even heavier, like the whole graveyard was pressing down. A moment later, a man's voice answered from within the black. Middle-aged. Deep. Flat with indifference. Sir. This is not a place you're allowed to enter. This is the graveyard of Shaoqi City's warriors. A shinobi like you coming here is an insult to them. Leave. Hikaru's lips curved slightly beneath the mask. And if I don't? He asked. Or, you answer a few questions, and then I leave. Then, the man said, voice dropping like a blade, we'll settle it with blood. Chapter 56, Don't Bluff. Fight to the death. Hearing those words, Hikaru paused for a brief moment, then an uncontrollable smile crept onto his face. Interesting. Truly interesting. He'd originally been unsure whether these people were really the remnants of Shaoqi City. But now, he was certain, these were exactly the people he'd been looking for. And even if he couldn't get the scroll from them directly, that wouldn't be a bad outcome either, would it? Luck was always the hardest thing to judge. What looked like misfortune to others might be the greatest stroke of luck in your own hands. If it were anyone else, running into people like this would feel like terrible luck. But Hikaru felt the opposite. He was far too lucky. So you want to decide life and death with me? Hikaru's voice remained gentle, almost soft. I understand. But don't bluff. Bluffing only makes your weakness more obvious. You arrogant brat. The middle-aged man's voice warped slightly, fury burning through it. You're dead. Is that so? Hikaru murmured. The senjutsu chakra within him stirred. Then, good night. Watch out. The instant Hikaru's words fell, the man felt a terrifying sense of danger and shouted instinctively. Too late. Hikaru's figure vanished. Like a ghost, he appeared beside a shinobi with genin-level chakra. The ninja blade in his hand flashed free, carving a thin silver arc through the pitch-black graveyard. It passed lightly, almost gently, across the man's throat. The shinobi only felt a brief chill at his neck. Then warmth spread rapidly across his chest. He opened his mouth, trying to speak, but only a hoarse, rasping sound escaped. His vision blurred, consciousness collapsing in on itself as he fell, blood soaking into the earth beneath him. Fast. Far too fast. Hikaru's ghost-like speed shattered their expectations. One man was dead without a sound, and fear exploded through the group. But Hikaru didn't stop. His speed surged again as he charged straight toward another target, a shinobi with Chunin-level chakra. There were roughly 8 of them in total. Aside from the middle-aged man, whose chakra clearly reached Jainin level, the rest were nothing more than Chunin and Genin. Clear the fodder first. Then deal with the Jainin. That was Hikaru's plan. These people might not pose much of a threat individually, but Hikaru refused to risk accidents. Besides, cutting them down would reveal the Jainin's mental state. Maybe he wouldn't even need to finish the cleanup. Maybe the man would break on his own. Unfortunately, when Hikaru cut down the second Chunin, the middle-aged man showed nothing but rage, no hesitation, no surrender. Don't underestimate us. As Hikaru flashed beside another Chunin, the man suddenly roared and drew a kunao, desperately trying to block the blade. PSHHK. Hikaru was in sage mode. His perception, speed, and reflexes were at their absolute peak. In midair, he adjusted the angle of his blade by the slightest margin. The sword pierced through the man's body as easily as slicing tofu. Hikaru frowned faintly. The man wasn't dead yet. With his last strength, he clamped down on Hikaru's blade. At the same time, Hikaru noticed something else. Explosive tags, tied to the kunao. This man had already given up on living. He was trying to drag Hikaru down with him. Boom! A violent explosion tore through the darkness of the graveyard. For an instant, the entire cemetery was illuminated, every grave, every tree, every twisted shadow laid bare beneath fire and thunder. Smoke and flames swallowed everything. As the blast faded, the Chunin collapsed completely. Half his body had been blown apart. The other half was mangled beyond recognition, wounds torn open like grotesque mouths, exposing twitching pink flesh within. Blood poured out in streams. Shards of metal were embedded throughout what remained of him. Moonlight filtered weakly through the trees, glinting off the fragments with an eerie blue-green sheen. As blood slowly coated them, the light flickered and dulled. They were fragments of Hikaru's blade. Humph! Hikaru landed steadily, his expression dark. Someone who faced death without flinching deserved a measure of respect, but they were also the most troublesome kind of enemy. His ninja blade had been destroyed. Still, using the brief flare of firelight and his perception, Hikaru had now pinpointed everyone's position. And more interestingly, they had also seen him land. They were already charging. Kill him. For Hikaru and the others. Don't let him live. For Shinobi Chunin and Genin rushed him all at once the moment he touched the ground. They knew the masked ANBU from Konoha was terrifyingly strong. But they also had something they had to protect. 3 of their companions were already dead. Friends. Comrades. They had to avenge them. Stop, come back. The Genin moved as well, but just before reaching Hikaru, his face changed drastically. Something was wrong. He possessed sharp sensory abilities, skills that had allowed him to monitor passing shinobi all this time, preventing them from disturbing the fallen warriors of Shaoqi City. Preventing them from defiling Lord Shaoqi's rest. That same perception had saved his life countless times in battle. He always sensed danger first. Always saw through disguises. And now, he could clearly tell. The Hikaru standing there wasn't real. It was a clone. And inside it, terrifying chakra was already swelling. Boom. Even with his warning, it was over. Chunin and Genin didn't possess his level of perception. And Hikaru had anticipated their movements long ago, leaving them almost no time to react. The explosion erupted again, shaking the ground violently. Dust and debris blasted skyward. Several graves shattered outright, coffins broken open, white bones spilling into the open air. Hikaru stood coldly atop a tree branch, looking down at the fallen shinobi. Their hoarse, broken screams echoed weakly through the graveyard. At last, his gaze settled on the lone remaining Genin. Now it's just the 2 of us, Hikaru said calmly. I warned you, don't bluff. Because bluffing only makes your weakness stand out more. Chapter 57, The Difference Between Sensor Ninja. Hikaru's expression didn't change. He simply watched the only man left standing, the middle-aged shinobi who still had the ability to fight. The man's anger had already hit its peak. His fists were clenched so hard the knuckles looked ready to split. The grief and fury rolling off him were so intense that Hikaru could practically taste them. But Hikaru didn't care. He'd never had the habit of going soft on enemies, especially enemies who'd clearly come here intending to kill him. Still, I have to give him some attention, Hikaru thought. He's obviously got decent sensory ability. He'd suspected it from the start. Now he was certain. No wonder Hikaru had felt someone probing them before, yet so faintly. No wonder the moment he made a move, the man sensed something was wrong. No wonder he'd noticed the clone trap earlier. It was all because this man was a censor. But being a censor wasn't some unbeatable trump card. Exceptional sensing could become a combat aid. But most sensory ability, in practice, was used for reconnaissance, tracking, detection, intelligence. Kumagakuer C, for example. Or Karin Uzumaki, one of the Uzumaki clan's surviving descendants. Both were classic intel-type sensors. Combat-type sensors were different. They pushed perception to the limit, then dragged it fully into close quarters fighting, reading intent, predicting movement, controlling the flow of battle. Honestly, people like that were rare. The only one Hikaru could name offhand was his ancestor. Senju Tobirama. Tobirama's political methods were sharp, and his strength was no joke either. It could be said that Konoha's rise was built on the foundation he reshaped with his own hands. Hiruzen Sarutobi had merely inherited that legacy. Tobirama wasn't like his brother Senju Hashirama, or Uchiha Madara, those monsters who could take on the shinobi world alone. But Tobirama had killed Uchiha Izuna with his own hands. Uchiha Izuna, Madara's younger brother, was a Mangeki Sharingan user. That kind of eyesight, extreme perception, technique copying, plus unpredictable jutsu was practically tailor-made to counter fighters who relied on ninjutsu and taijutsu the way Tobirama did. And yet Tobirama still won. Part of it was fundamentals, part of it was endless methods, but another part was Tobirama's extreme sensory ability. He read Izuna's rhythm, caught the moment of action. And in the end, Tobirama used the Flying Thunder God to land a decisive ambush. Izuna died. Hikaru's current development path in perception was, frankly, modeled after that ancestor who screwed over the whole clan. It wasn't perfect. For long-range scouting, it couldn't compete with the Byakugan. For fine-grained battlefield reading, it couldn't match the Sharingan. But not the best didn't mean useless. Sensing had enormous room to grow. Die. While Hikaru was thinking quietly, letting his chakra settle after the earlier consumption, the middle-aged Jainin finally snapped. Maybe it was the hoarse cries of comrades who were dying but not dead yet. Maybe it was the ones Hikaru had already killed. Maybe it was the white bones exposed by the blasts. All of it hammered his nerves until restraint broke. He lunged. Kunao in hand, his speed surged as he stabbed straight at Hikaru. Hikaru dipped his body and slipped the thrust. Then he moved like water. He twisted in, left hand producing a kunao and driving it toward the man's ribs, while his right leg pinned the man's left knee to disrupt his base. And his right fist rose from below, snapping toward the throat. A smooth, flowing chain of movements. In the blink of an eye, he'd read the man's intent and countered it cleanly. The Jainin's eyes widened for a fraction of a second. He hadn't expected this masked ANBU to react so fast. But he was calm. Years of fighting had forged him into someone with sharp battle instincts. Chakra flared. The moment Hikaru's kunao struck, white smoke exploded outward. The Jainin's body turned into a log. A substitution. And in the next instant, like a shadow sliding across the dark, the man appeared behind Hikaru, kunao aimed without hesitation for the back of Hikaru's skull. Damn it, that trick again. The Jainin's face changed the second his kunao pierced Hikaru. Because what his sensing told him was terrifyingly clear. The body he'd stabbed had already shifted into a clone. Worse, that violent, unstable chakra inside it was swelling. Just like before. It was going to explode. He forced his body into motion, throwing everything into a body flicker at the moment of detonation, barely escaping the heart of the blast radius. But the instant he landed, Hikaru was already on him. Like a ghost. A compressed surge of chakra, distinctly water release in nature, tinted with a cold blue, wrapped around Hikaru's kunao as he drove it in with ruthless precision. The Jainin had just forced a body flicker. His muscles were still stiff, his rhythm broken. For a moment, he couldn't react properly at all. But he was still a Jainin. And in that split second, he made the most correct choice available. He stepped forward to meet it, and a kunao appeared in his hand as well. So you're going for a mutual kill? Hikaru read the movement instantly. He hated coin flip gambles like this. But he also wasn't afraid of them. Not in sage mode. PSHHK. Hikaru's strike didn't slow for even a heartbeat. His kunao pierced straight through the man's chest, carefully controlled to avoid vital points. He still needed answers. Killing him now would be pointless. At the same time, as the enemy's kunao stabbed in, Hikaru lifted his left hand and caught it barehanded. The blade punched through his palm. Hikaru tilted his head just enough to keep the follow-through from driving into his skull. You don't have a chance anymore. Hikaru didn't even seem to care that his hand had been pierced. His gaze stayed flat, indifferent. Looks like in this fight to the death, I'm the one who won. Humph. The Jainin let out a shaky, pained breath. His voice trembled, speaking itself was difficult through the agony. Relax. You're not dead yet. Hikaru's tone was almost casual. I avoided your vitals. As he spoke, he pulled his left hand off the kunao. Blood dripped onto the ground in quick, heavy drops, then, visibly, the dripping slowed. Hikaru's recovery speed was fast. Not as absurd as his chakra recovery, but far better than normal. That was why he'd dared to catch the kunao directly without fear of crippling himself. What do you want? The Jainin gritted out, hatred thick in his voice. He could tell now Hikaru had a purpose beyond slaughter. It's simple. Hikaru looked down at him. I need to know where Shaoki Castle's grave is. Or. His voice lowered slightly, turning sharp, where the summoning scroll for his beast is. Chapter 58, Setting Off. Send power stones please. It was around 10 in the morning when Hikaru finally hauled himself out of bed. He glanced at his hand. The wound had basically healed. He nodded to himself. His recovery ability really wasn't bad. His entire palm had been pierced through, he'd even felt bone crack at the time, yet now he was already close to normal. Still a little stiff, he judged, flexing his fingers. Not very nimble yet, but more than enough. As an ANBU, Hikaru wore gloves as a matter of habit, so he wasn't worried Kakashi would notice anything. Because what he'd done last night, honestly, it wasn't exactly clean. After defeating the Jainin, Hikaru hadn't hesitated. He'd used genjutsu interrogation to rip information out of him. His genjutsu wasn't exceptional in a battlefield sense, but interrogation techniques were different. Those, he did know. It was professional necessity. He'd never allowed himself to fall behind on the tools of the trade. The Jainin had tried to resist when he realized Hikaru's goal. He'd even preferred to die rather than spill the secret. Unfortunately for him, none of that mattered. In the end, Hikaru got what he wanted. The first piece of intelligence was the exact location of Shaoqi Castle's grave. Hikaru's luck was decent. The grave really was inside that cemetery, just under an altered name so no one would recognize it. Clearly, Shaoqi Castle had worried the Land of Fire might desecrate his tomb, so he'd arranged for these fanatics to stay behind as sentries. And the other graves in that cemetery? They weren't random. They were the most loyal warriors from that era buried together with Shaoqi Castle in the same place. The second piece of intelligence was about the summoning scroll. According to the Jainin, the scroll was not in the grave. Because Shaoqi Castle's burial had been handled by them personally and there was nothing inside. Hikaru treated that claim with cautious skepticism. He trusted his interrogation genjutsu. It had never failed him over the years. But he also knew what kind of man he'd been dealing with. A censor-type shinobi had excellent chakra control by default. It wasn't impossible for someone like that to feed him false information. Maybe both pieces of intel were lies. So Hikaru made a decision. He wouldn't kill the Jainin yet. First, he'd verify everything. Reality proved his technique hadn't been wrong, and the man hadn't lied. Hikaru dug up Shaoqi Castle's grave. The body was long reduced to bone, but ANBU had their own methods of identifying remains. Even skeletons could be checked and verified. Based on the information he'd extracted, Hikaru already had a rough sense of Shaoqi Castle's appearance. After a careful process, he could basically confirm the remains matched. And the grave goods inside the coffin weren't the kind of things an ordinary person could ever afford, let alone be buried with. Assuming there wasn't a substitution trick involved, Hikaru concluded, it should be him. He tidied himself up, then stepped out of his room. As for the Jainin's final fate, he'd followed Shaoqi Castle into the ground. After years in ANBU, Hikaru was used to the principle of eradicating loose ends. ANBU operations left no trace. Once conflict erupted, they didn't hold back. There wasn't much personal hatred between them, but Hikaru's goal was something they would never allow. So mercy was never on the table. ANBU really isn't a place for humans, Hikaru thought as he walked down the inn's corridor. It's easy to twist people. Except me. Kakashi was already waiting, fully prepared. The two of them left the inn together. Kakashi was sharp. Even with Hikaru's hand hidden, he still sensed something. Your hand is injured, Kakashi said directly. I smell blood. Are you all right? I'm fine. Hikaru glanced at him. Don't worry. It wasn't an accident and it won't be a problem. And it truly wasn't. With bandaging and his unusual physical recovery, the injury looked frightening but wasn't fatal. Before fighting that Jainin, Hikaru had even taken antitoxin medicine just in case the kunao was poisoned. It hadn't been. Which meant the medicine had been wasted. But wasting it was better than dying from carelessness. All right. I understand. Kakashi nodded. So what's the plan? We go straight in. Yes. Hikaru smiled lightly. I've already done what needed doing. Now there's only one last thing left. Find the scroll. Scroll. Kakashi frowned, then seemed to realize something. Captain, you mean? MHM. Exactly. Hikaru didn't bother hiding it. There was no point. When they returned to Konoha, he'd have to write a report anyway and he intended to use it in the future, so secrecy here was meaningless. A beast like that will absolutely increase my strength, Hikaru said calmly. And if war ever breaks out, something like that on the battlefield is a strategic asset. Kakashi nodded. True. A summon of that size could drastically boost a shinobi's overall power, especially during wartime. Those creatures were strategic weapons. If Hikaru really could claim it, it would be good for Konoha as well. The problem was obvious, though. A summoned beast like that needed a summoning scroll as a restraint. Without it, nobody could reliably control the monster. Captain, Kakashi asked after a brief pause, do you know where the scroll is? Last night, you went to investigate that, didn't you? Yes. Hikaru brushed it off with a casual tone. There was some unpleasantness, but I didn't leave traces. Then he continued smoothly, as if talking about the weather. From what I gathered, the scroll should be inside the castle. So. Kakashi picked up the thread without asking what had happened. Shaoki Castle put the scroll into the summoned beast's belly before he died. Probably. Hikaru nodded, then grinned. Well? Want to take a little risk with me? At that, Kakashi actually rolled his eyes flat, dead fish, full of resignation. Hikaru blinked. It was the first time he'd ever seen that expression on Kakashi. He laughed, patted Kakashi's shoulder, and headed out. He didn't know exactly what would happen next. But he was looking forward to it. Author's special note: first 5 viewers who access my discount code 535C1 will receive my highest membership Sanin at just $25, which is 50% off. Don't miss out. Chapter 59, Assault. It didn't take long for Hikaru and Kakashi to arrive outside Shaoki Castle. Staring up at the massive structure before him, Hikaru felt a faint tremor of excitement stir in his chest. The castle was enormous, so large that standing in front of it made a human feel insignificant. What made it even more unsettling was the fact that, despite Shaoki City's fall 30 or 40 years ago, the castle still looked pristine. Untouched by time. That alone spoke volumes. I'm getting more and more curious, Hikaru thought quietly. Just how strong is this lizard? He glanced sideways at Kakashi, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. We're about to walk into that thing's body, he said lightly. You ready? There's no need to phrase it in such a disgusting way, Captain. Kakashi sighed. Besides, I'm not going in alone, you're coming with me. His words were arguably even more morbid than Hikaru's. The implication was obvious: if something goes wrong, at least there's someone to die with. Hikaru knew Kakashi was joking, but it was still headache-inducing. Thankfully, his focus wasn't on banter. He stepped forward and pushed open the castle gates. There was no lock. With only a light shove, the massive doors creaked open. But the moment they stepped inside, bang! The gates slammed shut behind them on their own. Kakashi frowned. Interesting, Hikaru murmured. At once, his perception expanded outward, sweeping across everything around them. Captain, Kakashi said suddenly, his voice low. This is the summoned beast's mouth. The environment here is an illusion. It has fairly strong genjutsu capabilities. With the Sharingan active, Kakashi could see through the disguise. The interior revealed its true form: layers of flesh, distorted walls. More disturbingly, chakra flowed within those fleshy membranes, pulsing and writhing slowly. Understood, Hikaru nodded. Then his expression changed. Without warning, he grabbed Kakashi and leapt upward. In the instant they left the ground, dozens of thick, red, cylindrical tentacles burst out from below, whipping toward them in a coordinated assault. The tentacles didn't strike randomly, they overlapped, crossed, and supported one another, forming a dense net of attacks. Kakashi reacted instantly. As Hikaru hauled him clear, he drew his ninja blade, lightning chakra crackling across it as he slashed hard at the incoming tentacles. Water release, severing wave. Hikaru wasn't idle either. He formed seals at high speed and spat out a razor-thin, highly compressed jet of water. Wherever the water blade passed, tentacles were cleanly severed. Unfortunately, despite their destructive power, this was still the enemy's territory. And Hikaru quickly noticed something troubling. The summoned beast's regenerative ability was terrifying. Even after being cut apart, the tentacles twitched with vitality. Fueled by a steady supply of chakra, fresh flesh rapidly sprouted from the severed ends. What's going on? Hikaru frowned. I don't remember Naruto getting attacked the moment he came in. His perception surged outward again, scanning the entire interior. To be precise, the creature's entire belly. In the original story, it should have been on the top floor. He thought. But I can't rely on that completely. Not after everything that's changed. Not below. Following normal logic, Hikaru checked the deepest area first. He immediately ruled it out. That was the stomach. Even without seeing it, he could sense the terrifying concentration of gastric acid there. Scattered bones, some lying down, some slumped upright, were more than enough proof of its lethality. But the number of skeletons was small. Some had already been partially dissolved. So it's already starving this badly. Hikaru thought grimly. No wonder there's no waste. He slashed through another tentacle with a kunai and twisted aside, narrowly avoiding another strike. Fighting while gathering information wasn't difficult for him. His perception rose upward. If it wasn't below, then it had to be above. In an instant, his sensory field pierced through layers of flesh, spreading toward the upper regions. The summoned beast's illusion techniques were impressive above. The area had been disguised as rows of rooms and corridors. Anyone else might have been fooled completely. But under Hikaru's perception, those rooms were exposed for what they really were: organs, cavities, and structural tissue. And in the highest chamber, he found it. A massive scroll, laid flat inside. There it is. Hikaru's eyes lit up. After confirming it several times, a smile finally surfaced. That was it. No doubt about it. With the objective located, there was no reason to keep tangling with endless tentacles. The correct move was obvious: grab the prize and leave. Follow me. Don't get dragged into a fight. Hikaru shouted back to Kakashi and sprinted toward the upper levels without hesitation. Kakashi responded instantly. He severed a lunging tentacle and leapt after Hikaru, staying close while providing cover as they charged upward. The entire castle began to tremble. It was clear the lizard had realized their goal. More tentacles emerged. Smaller lizards began spilling out as well. Even the illusionary walls started to fail, revealing pulsating flesh beneath. Countless small lizards split from the meat-covered walls and swarmed toward them. Hikaru jumped, driving a kunai through one lizard's skull midair, his brow knitting tightly. There are way too many, he thought. For the first time, he truly appreciated just how absurd Naruto's luck had been. They pushed forward at full speed, cutting down attackers as they went. Finally, they reached the top floor, the chamber where the scroll lay. The door was tightly shut. And with their intrusion, the summoned beast could no longer fully maintain its illusion. The door flickered between solid wood and raw flesh, overlapping in a grotesque, unsettling blend. Hikaru didn't slow down. He moved at full speed, forming seals with one hand while his kunai was flooded with blue chakra. Water release, water blade slash. The kunai, infused with razor-sharp water chakra, stabbed forward under Hikaru's control. With a thunderous crash, the door burst apart. Everything inside was laid bare. At the center, resting neatly atop a table. The scroll. Hikaru saw it immediately. A bright, satisfied smile spread across his face. Looks like, he murmured, we made it. Chapter 60, Masashi Kishimoto? Hikaru and Kakashi burst into the room at full speed, and at the same time, the castle started shaking violently. It was as if the summoned beast sensed a lethal threat. A deafening roar rolled through its body, and the internal environment twisted and warped in response. The illusion it had been barely maintaining collapsed completely. On the fleshy walls, cell-like tissue churned and swelled, spreading in a blink until it covered everything. The tentacles attacking them multiplied, lashing out more and more frantically, like it had decided this would end only with death. Cover me, Kakashi. Hikaru's voice had lost its usual warmth. He wasn't panicked, but the coldness in that tone was something Kakashi had never heard from him before. Kakashi didn't waste time reacting to it. He knew exactly what this moment meant. If they succeeded, Hikaru would gain a powerful summon of enormous size, and that was good for Konoha too. If they failed, both of them would become food. They were still young. And Kakashi no longer carried that old, hollow impulse of, if the mission fails, I'll just go join Obito and Rin. So he clenched his teeth and went all in. That many tentacles. Kakashi's mind raced. If I can't clear them in one go, it'll turn into a nightmare. Lightning crackled into his palm. Arcs of electricity spread outward, dyeing him and everything around him an intense blue. The current didn't stop there. It began to extend, expanding its reach. It has to spread, Kakashi calculated, eyes sharpening. Cover my whole body so I don't get grabbed. And clear a path so Captain can move. His gaze turned firm. The lightning surged. And then, the arcs wrapped around Kakashi's body. Blue light swept through the space like an aurora. The tentacles crashed down, and were instantly torn apart, shredded by the electric wave. Kakashi didn't care about his chakra reserves anymore. He poured chakra out as if it was free. Lightning flooded the air, the aurora surging without restraint. The sound was like 1,000 Chidori crying out at once, and the stench of scorched flesh filled the room. In the blink of an eye, a wide space was cleared around them. Hikaru stared, momentarily dumbstruck. He swore he'd seen that technique before in the manga, in the anime. But in his memory, Kakashi wasn't supposed to be able to use it. At least, he didn't remember Kakashi ever displaying it, even if he laid the groundwork for it. Hikaru thought, stunned, I remember him never using it like this. For a split second, Hikaru almost suspected Kakashi was the one who'd been reborn. Because that was Chidori Stream, one of Uchiha Sasuke's signature techniques. And even if Sasuke developed it, that would only be after he'd defected from Konoha. Kakashi and Sasuke wouldn't even meet again until years later, 3 years after Sasuke's escape. Right now, they were at least 16 years away from that point. Yet Kakashi had just used it. How could Hikaru not be shocked? But the urgency snapped him back fast. There was no time to obsess over it. Deal with the summon first, Hikaru forced himself to focus. Then I'll interrogate Kakashi later. And besides, Kakashi was already running out of time. Hikaru could sense it clearly. Kakashi's chakra couldn't support that level of expenditure for long. On top of that, the burden of the Sharingan on a non-Uchiha body was brutal. A transplanted Sharingan constantly consumed chakra. Without Uchiha lineage, the drain was even worse. Most people needed Hashirama's cells or other extreme measures to stabilize it. Kakashi was the only anomaly in the shinobi world so far, at least in this era. In the future, there might be another, someone named Shin. But Kakashi paid for that anomaly with a constant tax, his chakra was always being siphoned to feed that eye. Hikaru didn't waste time. He yanked the scroll open with his left hand, tossed his kunao down with his right, and in the instant the kunao fell, his thumb cut across it, slicing a shallow line into his skin. Before the wound could close, he didn't even bother looking closely. He signed his name with speed and certainty. Senju Hikaru. For a summoning contract, he wasn't about to gamble with a false name like Shinkami Hikaru. If the contract rejected it, they'd be finished. The moment the signature was completed, the beast seemed to weaken only for an instant. Then, Hikaru felt it surge back to full strength. And the malice in it sharpened. It roared even more violently, tentacles blooming again across the entire space. From the walls, foul-smelling green slime began dripping down in thick streams. A few strands of acidic fluid splashed onto Kakashi's clothing, melting holes straight through. If they didn't get out now, they'd be dissolved alive. Hikaru grabbed Kakashi, who was already close to empty, and hauled him up. He slung the scroll across his back. Then he formed seals with one hand. In a heartbeat, the technique was ready. Water release, hard whirlpool water blade. Chakras surged. A raging whirlpool formed around Hikaru's right hand fast, violent water spiraling into a condensed shape. The technique compressed further, becoming a water spear made of layered, rapidly rotating currents. Hikaru leapt and drove it forward like a lance, stabbing into the flesh wall ahead. The entire castle convulsed. A massive, agonized cry shook the air. Boom! Under that extreme compression and rotation, the hard whirlpool water blade drilled a clean breach through the flesh. Sunlight poured in. For a split second, Hikaru felt as though he'd seen long-lost daylight. He threw Kakashi through the opening with all his strength, then jumped after him. The instant they cleared the breach, Hikaru saw it begin to heal. Less than a second, and the wound was already closing. That regeneration is ridiculous. And now, what stood before them was no longer a castle. It was a colossal lizard, head thrown back as it roared to the sky. Its eyes locked onto Hikaru, the one now tied to it by an unmistakable contract. It stared. Then, poof! The beast dissolved into smoke and vanished. Where the Grand Shaoki Castle had stood, only a barren foundation remained, stripped down to bare stone. Hikaru landed steadily and let out a long breath. The entire ordeal hadn't actually taken that much time. But for him and Kakashi, it felt like hours. He glanced at Kakashi lying motionless nearby and shook his head. Then he set the scroll down. His own exhaustion hit him a beat later. His grip slipped. The scroll fell, hit the ground, and rolled open. Hikaru sighed and crouched, intending to tidy it up before dragging Kakashi away. But as he reached for it, his gaze snagged on a name. And Hikaru froze. This is... He blinked, slowly, as if his eyes were playing tricks on him. Masashi Kishimoto.
Additionally, if you would like to request novels and access my Google Drive where I have 200+ audiobooks, then you can join my Patreon. Link is also provided in the description.